Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this remote meeting of the Lewes District Council Planning Applications Committee on 31st March 2021. I am Councillor Davey, Chair of this committee. This meeting is being held remotely in accordance with the recently published government regulations. For those participating in the meeting or watching on the live stream, please bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. I will now take agenda items 1, 2 and 3 together, introductions, attendance and substitutes and declarations of interest. Can I now ask my fellow committee members to introduce themselves to listeners via a roll call? This is to be done in alphabetical order, and I will ask that each confirms their name, if they are acting as a substitute, and whether they wish to make a declaration of interest in any item on the agenda, and the nature of that interest. Before I do so, I confirm we have had apologies from Councillor Papanikolaou and Councillor Von Kirchie. Also, I have no interest to declare on any of the items on this agenda. The roll call is Councillor Graham Amy, please.
Councillor Graham Amy, no items to declare on any matters on the agenda, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Duhigg, please.
Councillor Linda Duhigg.
Thank you. Councillor Tom Jones, please.
Councillor Tom Jones, I have no interest.
Thank you. Councillor Jim Lord.
Sorry, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair. Yes, Councillor Jim Lord. I'm acting for Councillor Papanikolaou, as I'm finding she's had an accident and unable to attend. Thank you, Chair. I have no declaration of interest either, by the way. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Millie Manley, please.
Councillor Millie Manley, no interest to declare.
Councillor MacLeod, please.
Councillor MacLeod, I'm substituting for Councillor Von Kirchie and no interest to declare, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Imogen Makepeace.
Councillor Imogen Makepeace, and I also have no interest to declare on items on the agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence O'Connor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lawrence O'Connor, I have no interest to declare on the items on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Saunders, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Steve Saunders, I have no interest to declare on any of the items on the agenda today. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've covered everyone on the committee with the substitutes. Yeah. Councillor?
You missed out Councillor Sylvia Lord.
Okay, Councillor Sylvia Lord. I thought I said her name, actually. Forgive me. Councillor Sylvia Lord.
Councillor Sylvia Lord, I have no declaration of interest to declare.
Thank you. So I think we have the full roll call with the substitutes.
Chair, may I come in, please? I forgot to say that I had no declarations of interest on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duhigg.
Thank you.
Also joining us are officers Mr. Andrew Hill, Senior Planning Advisor, and Mrs. Joanne Stone, Solicitor, and also Mr. Lee Palmer, who are in attendance to present reports and respond to any questions from members. Democratic Services Officer Mrs. Jennifer Norman is also in attendance, and other Democratic Services officers are assisting in the background on this meeting. Please can I ask all participants ensure their microphones have been muted when not speaking. If you have connection issues, you may find it will help if you turn off your camera when not speaking. Agenda item 4, minutes. Councillors, do you wish me to sign the minutes of the last meeting on 10th March 2021 as a correct record? I would take it that all are in agreement unless someone speaks now to disagree. Thank you. The minutes have been approved. Agenda item 5, urgent matters. There are no items to be considered as a matter of urgency. There is an officer's update, which is a supplementary report, which has been sent out to members on email. Please, can any members indicate now if they have not received it? Thank you. Agenda item 6, petitions. There are no petitions. Agenda item 7, written questions. There are no written questions from members pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 12.3. Now, to ensure that all parties are clear as to the Council's constitution, the committee is not in a position to accept any new additional documentation sent to us electronically today, although previously submitted documents will be referred to as part of the officer's presentation where appropriate. We now come to the planning applications. For those unfamiliar with the procedure of planning applications, excuse me. First, there is a presentation by planning officers. Then we would normally hear public speakers. However, live public speaking has temporarily been suspended during remote meetings. Instead, public speakers have been invited to send in speeches which will be read out by an officer. Any received will be heard in this order. A representation from town or parish council, maximum of 5 minutes, up to 3 speeches from objectors, a maximum of 3 minutes each, up to 3 speeches from supporters, a maximum of 3 minutes each, a speech from a ward member, a maximum of 5 minutes. Members are then invited to discuss the application and put forward a recommendation. I will ask members to raise their hands electronically if they wish to speak. If their electronic hand is not working, please put up your hand manually. To vote, I will call the name of each committee member present in alphabetical order. Please clearly state whether you are for, against, or are abstaining from voting, or if you have missed part of the debate and are unable to vote. It is essential that members are present for the entire presentation and discussion of the application to be able to vote on that item. If a member very briefly loses their internet connection, this may not disqualify them from voting on the item, provided they seek clarification as to anything they may have missed as soon as possible after they have reconnected. Can all councillors, officers and participants please clearly state their name each time they speak so that it is clear to members of the public listening who is speaking. Please, can I now move to planning applications not within the South Downs National Park? Thank you, Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee. First item on the agenda is the application at Westbourne, Ringmer. This is the site, your agenda item. It's quite a large site, flanked by Lewes Road to the northwest, Green Acres Drive to the northeast, and Sadler's Way to the southeast, surrounded by a number of properties, number 16 and number 14 Green Acres Drive bungalows. 35 to 39 Sadler's Way are also bungalows. Number 41 is a 2-storey dwelling. And again, number 43 is a bungalow that's had the loft space converted. And we've got some photos of that property when we look through the site in a moment. This is a site that is allocated within the Ringmer neighbourhood plan. It's all contained within the planning boundary. And there's an area of established character which runs which and includes Shepherd's Mead, Westbourne, Penhouse, Chatsfield, and the larger properties. And it runs approximately in this position here, all the way down. So it includes all of these properties, and the character of that area is down to the large dwellings and the spacious character of the plots in which the dwellings sit. As I said, this site is allocated within the Ringman neighbourhood plan. This is the largest site. The application site only encompasses a small part of the whole site. The allocation in the plan is for 12 dwellings, and it includes the properties of Shepherd's Mead, Westbourne and Penhouse. So the allocation, as I say, under RES1 is for 12 dwellings. The Appendix 6 of the neighbourhood plan, just for members' information, makes it very clear that in terms of this development, and it provides a little bit more flesh on what could or could not be required, states that the density of development on the site should not exceed 20 dwellings per hectare. If you look at the extract here with the site area of 0.85 and the number of units proposed 12, that would give you a density, average density on the whole site of 14 units per hectare. The scheme you've got tonight involves 6 dwellings, and I'll come on to how that density compares in a little while. So this is the plot of Westbourne. So the main house has now been sold off and is on separate ownership, and the remainder of the site, including the access road, and it goes down to this point here. These are the 2 plots that were bungalows, and then going up the site, you can just make out from this aerial photo where the land has been cleared for one of the 2-storey dwellings. And this plot here, which is for the second of the 2-storey dwellings, again has already had the trenches dug for foundations. This is an extant consent, and it can be completed at any time. The council has deemed work to have started, and indeed by the very nature of carrying out the extension works to Westbourne itself, which was part of the overall planning application originally, that would validate the permission. But notwithstanding that, substantive building works have taken place within the site. The scheme that was previously proposed and approved, as I say, had access coming in to the north side of Westbourne and a 2-storey dwelling, which is just to the north of number 43, and to the rear of the site, at its lowest point, 2 relatively large bungalows. They had quite a high ridge height, as some members may remember, and so much so that we did impose, after amended plans, a condition preventing any mezzanine floors being inserted within them. So that is the scheme which has consent. The current proposal is on a very similar footprint, involves 3 pairs of semi-detached bungalows. Again, going down the site, the difference here is that this bungalow is pretty much on the location of the 2-storey dwelling that was previously approved. It will have an attached bungalow to it, so you've got a pair of semi-detached here. Going down the site again, this bungalow here is on the location of the previously approved dwelling, as near as Dammit, and again to the north, east, western side of that footprint is the additional bungalow. And to the southeast of the site, in the bottom corner, where you may remember there were 2 detached plots, again it's proposed to patch the buildings now and to provide again another pair of semi-detached bungalows. Grey blocks to the flanks of each of the bungalows is a flat roofed extension, which would be in with a grass seed and roof. Each property has 2 car parking spaces to each property, and there are 2 additional car parking spaces here for visitors. The bungalows themselves are all identical floor plans. So this is just one of the typical units, 3 good-sized bedrooms and a combined living, dining, kitchen area. All the rooms comply with the national space standards, and they'll say the buildings themselves are identical throughout the site. In terms of elevational treatment, and again, very simple with tile-hung main facades and the flat roofed element to have a brick elevation. Flat roofs of the structures to be covered with sedum, a living roof. Small punctuations of roof lights, but again, a very simple but quite a contemporary feel to the traditional bungalow form. In terms of the comparison of the two schemes, these I'm just going to refer to really this section here and this section here. The bottom one is the section looking to the north, looking through the site. This is the house known as Westbourne, and really to point out here, it's one of the 2-storey dwellings, the second 2-storey dwelling, and the bungalows down the bottom, the detached bungalows. And as a comparison, this is the current proposal, and you can see, not precisely to the same scale, but you can see the difference in terms of the massing of the buildings, with the 2-storey units being replaced with single-storey bungalows here. And at the bottom end of the site, the bungalows taking a more familiar sort of form and not having the accentuated roof void, so thus keeping the massing of the buildings much lower than the previous scheme. Just mentioning very quickly in terms of going back to the factor of density, I mentioned the density of the neighbourhood plan, which gives you on that site area for 12 units a density of 14 units per hectare. By taking the site area, which is the area in red here, it includes all of the development, and it includes the roadways, the hard surfacing, the gardens. That is how densities are measured. You can't exclude the roads or the hard surfaces or the amenity areas from a calculation. Otherwise, it would put your density calculation through the roof. You take it as the red line site area, and taking that site area, which for the current proposal is approximately 0.395 of a hectare with 6 units, that will give you a residential density of 15 units per hectare. If you took the site as a whole, that is, you took the 3 dwellings, which is as per the allocation within the neighbourhood plan, Shepherd's Mead, Penthouse, and the donor dwelling, then you would have a site area which runs down here, round there, at the bottom, and including Penthouse. That would give you a site area of 0.85 hectares. And if you took the 6 dwellings plus the 3 that are existing, that would give you 9 units on the entire site, and thus a density of 10 units per hectare. But without overly complicating things, I think the factors that need to be borne in mind is that the allocation within the neighbourhood plan is for up to 12 dwellings on the larger site, and that density should not exceed 20 units per hectare, and that the proposal in front of you tonight with the 6 dwellings on this proportion of the overall site allocation gives you a density of approximately 15 units per hectare, well within the guideline figures set out in the neighbourhood plan, and that which is set out in the Lewes district local plan, which gives for village settlements a density of between 20 and 30 dwellings per hectare. Just refreshing members that remember the first application, taking some photos through the site now. This is the access from the Lewes Road. The access itself is as per the previous application. Highways have considered it and are satisfied with the means of access and egress from the site and the visibility displays both north and south. So the access will go in here, wrap around the side of Westbourne and access down the northern part of the site. This is just stepping into the site. The access on the Lewes Road is here, Westbourne here, Shepherd's Mead on the right here. So this is the access road. This wall has now been built, so Westbourne is now self-contained dwelling and separate from the wider application site. Just turning round and looking back into the site, the access would come down this part of the site with the dwellings, 2 pairs down here and a pair of bungalows again at the bottom of the site. You can just make out the roofs of the bungalows to the southern part of the site, number 35 to 39 Sadler's Way. This is number 41 Sadler's Way, which is the 2-storey dwelling. And here with the gable end and the dormers facing to the northwest is number 43 Sadler's Way, sorry. And again, looking closer to that northern boundary where the access road will run, just to give you a feel for the site and the change in levels as you move down the site. Again, walking down the site, this is just giving an idea and the proximity of the nearest dwellings on the northern flank, 16 and number 14 Greenacres Drive, just tucked in here. And just walking down further, this is number 14 Greenacres Drive. So you're at the bottom part of the site now, and you can just see the area that was dug out to accommodate the detached bungalows as previously proved. And again, turning around, looking back up the site, this gives you a better idea of the slope and the changing levels from Westbourne down to the bottom part of the site. I don't think there's a lot to add to the report, Chair. I think it's all the aspects are set out. I would just draw attention to slight error on page 29 of the report, condition 11, just picked up. That should read that any part of the development hereby permitted an electric vehicle charging facility, and not as set out in the report, an electric vehicle shall be provided to the property. We've made that change on the draft decision notice should members approve the scheme as set out. But I think for the reasons set out in the report, this is an allocated site within the Ringmer Neighbourhood Plan. It complies with the requirements of that broad policy, and your officers are recommending approval as set out both in the report and subject to the conditions that are listed therein. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. I'll now call upon Mrs. Jennifer Norman and Mr. Lee Palmer to read out the public speeches. Thank you. Mrs. Norman.
Thank you, Chair. Lee Palmer. I shall read out the representations that we received in objection to the proposal, and we have 3 of them on this case. First of all is a statement on behalf of Christopher Bowers, who's a neighbour, in objection to this application, LW 200795. The sheer fact that you have this application for 6 dwellings for this site in front of you in 2021 is a travesty of the planning system. I am one of a group of neighbouring and adjacent residents who recognised about 8 years ago, when the Ringmer Neighbourhood Plan was in preparation, that there would be some development in the garden behind the house known as Westbourne, and there was clearly a case for it. There's a gap in the line of 17 bungalows and another gap in a line of 3 bungalows and 1 house. So the case for 2 bungalows was clear, and we could even see a reasoned case for 3. I mention this because opposition to this development is not NIMBYist. We are happy to accept development in our backyard, but appropriate development. And both the neighbourhood plan and the local plan support us in this by requiring any development to respect the established neighbourhood. So really 3 bungalows would be the absolute maximum. The permission for 4 dwellings was given in 2016. This is already overdevelopment, and now we have an application for 6 dwellings in what is a much smaller site. This is more than excessive. If you approve this application, you will effectively be ripping up the Ringmer Neighbourhood Plan. The plan contains a development brief specifically for this site, agreed after exhaustive planning inspection and approved by the Ministry. While the NPPF has since been updated, the development brief must take precedence over other policies. Otherwise, why does it exist? Parish councils have precious little power, but the neighbourhood plan was a shining achievement by Ringmer. Do you really want to render it meaningless? That's what you will be doing if 6 dwellings are approved. The reason for this application is before you is that the applicant has hit major problems with drainage. Yes, he and Southern Water could get a warrant to force through a solution, but it costs them tens of thousands of pounds, which affects his profits. So he wants to increase his income by building 6 dwellings, not 4. But it's not the planning system's job to help him out of a hole he is in because he's overpaid for a piece of land without doing his homework. We have done some calculations based on information from Ringmer's estate agents that suggest developers' best income would come from 4 quality detached bungalows, the kind of dwellings his website claims he specialises in, and that would be close to the right outcome for this site. If he applied for that, I would not oppose it, nor would most other residents, but 6 semi-detached bungalows crammed, yes, crammed into this small infill space is frankly taking the mickey. And the compromise solution of 4 quality bungalows doesn't have a chance if you approve this application. You have ample reasons based on robust planning policies for rejecting this application. I strongly urge you to do so. And that concludes the speech on behalf of Christopher Bowers. Chair, if I can move on to the second letter of objection, received on behalf of Martin Weld, a near neighbour, in objection to this application, LW 2795. Despite what the officer's report says, the application breaches planning policy on density. LDLP policy ST3, open brackets A, close brackets, and Ringmer Neighbourhood Plan policy 9.1 say new development must respect density, massing, site coverage, character and layout of neighbouring buildings and the spatial, visual, historical context in which it resides. And specific development brief for the site has the principal aim that new development should respect the character of the existing neighbourhood development. The application, however, proposes plot sizes less than half that of the surrounding dwellings and a housing density more than double. The density proposed is stated at 15 units per hectare, and that is comparable to the plot sizes of the neighbouring homes, although the applicant's arbitrary selection of which homes ignores the adjacent dwellings on Sadler's Way, which account for the majority of the homes bordering the site, and which sits on plot sizes up to 3 times greater than those proposed. For example, 43 Sadler's Way would have a new boundary with 3 of the proposed properties, as well as bordering the visitor parking spaces and turning head. Ignoring these properties in any density comparison is duplicitous and unacceptable. If using plot sizes of surrounding dwellings for comparison, as the applicant states, then logic dictates a comparison to the plot sizes of the proposed units. The aggregate plot size of the 6 dwellings at 0.25 hectares resolves to a housing density of 24 units per hectare, 140% greater than the surrounding neighbourhood. Even if the applicant's debate assertion of 15 units per hectare is still 50% greater than the density of the surrounding dwellings. The density of the surrounding dwellings is 10 units per hectare. This was established in 2016 by the same architect and used for the present application and accepted as valid by all stakeholders, including PAC, Planning Application Committee, to justify the 4 new dwellings then proposed, which was also stated to be 10 per hectare. This is confirmed in the 2016 officer report, which said, and I quote, the development would provide a density of 10 units per hectare, which is similar to that in both Sadler's Way and Green Acres Drive, and which respects the surrounding character and that of the area established character and is considered to be appropriate for this location. And more intensive development and the site would likely adversely affect the appearance and character of the area, having regard to the Lewes District Local Plan Policy ST3. Despite attempts by the applicant to reimagine the density of the surrounding neighbourhood, nothing has changed since 2016, except the subsequent sale of Westbourne House means the site is now 90% smaller than before. Yet the applicant wants to build 50% more dwellings. The density now proposed clearly contradicts planning department pronouncements and breaches established planning policies. Squeezing in more homes creates a dense overdevelopment. It cannot be considered similar or comparable to the surrounding neighbourhood and would adversely affect the established character. The application should therefore be rejected. And that concludes the speech in objection from Martin Weld, a near neighbour. Moving on to the third and last neighbour objection, on behalf of Jennifer Barrett, also a near neighbour to this application, L20 0795. The application represents an unreasonable attack on existing amenity and character and will create unforeseen parking issues. LDLP, NPPF and RNP policies stress that the development must respect the amenity of adjoining properties in terms of noise, light, pollution, privacy, other disturbances and security. Amenity was clearly dismissed as unimportant when approving planning application 0703 in 2016. What protection are we now offered by planning policies when the impact has been subjectively dismissed as acceptable? The officer offers no real evidence why it will be acceptable, when it is clear that the proposed 50% increase in density will further exacerbate the situation for existing residents, particularly in terms of noise, overlooking, disturbance, and potentially security. For example, at 16 Green Acres and just over 2.4 metres from the narrow site road, our amenity is hugely compromised and cannot be construed as acceptable. Parking. Two visitor parking spaces for 6 dwellings are totally inadequate and also further exacerbated amenity problems. ESCC's parking assessment tool is not suitable for this particular site. The simple application of a standard metric may create a problem on such a densely packed development with limited space for manoeuvring vehicles. Extant planning permission states 4 spaces are needed for 4 dwellings. So why the disparity? Recently, we've seen a huge social change leading to increased vehicle use, notably an exponential explosion of online shopping with its deliveries, further exacerbated by COVID. Research indicates that trend will continue post-pandemic. Higher, greater intensity of traffic with the resultant noise and pollution of all kinds. With such limited visitor parking and manoeuvrability, a single turning area, a scenario of vans, trucks arriving and leaving at the same time, it will take just one badly parked vehicle to cause chaos and potentially a dangerous situation, possibly requiring a vehicle to need to reverse out onto a busy main road or impede an emergency vehicle. Restricted parking on Lewes Road means others will find this a convenient road to leave cars, further compounding the parking problem. Character. Both LDLP policy 3A and RNP policy 9.1 make it abundantly clear that the character of the development should respect and take into account the character of the neighbouring buildings and the historical context in which they reside. And there is also specific development brief for Westbourne, with the principal aim that new developments in this site should respect the character and the existing neighbouring development. The proposed development of semi-detached units of significantly different character, crammed into a relatively small space, no space between each pair of units, each having relatively much smaller gardens, no garages, sitting on plot sizes averaging less than half those of the neighbouring development, will not nestle harmoniously with those that are around it. The development as proposed will negatively impact on the appearance and character of the area and be contrary to the stated policies. For these reasons, members should see that this is a blatant overdevelopment, is not appropriate for this site. And Chair, that concludes the speech on behalf of Jennifer Barrett and concludes the speeches in objection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palmer. We're over to Mrs. Norman now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr. Palmer. This is Jennifer Norman, Democratic Services Officer, and I will be reading out the remainder of the written representations received in respect of planning application LW/20/0795. We have two supporting statements and one statement from the Lewes District Ward Councillor, Councillor Johnny Denis, and I will begin with the first representation in respect of the application, supporting the application from Sam Sykes of ECE Planning, and Sam is the agent. This statement has been written by Sam Sykes of ECE Planning in support of this planning application. The application seeks approval for 6 well-designed single-story dwellings at a sustainable location within the settlement of Ringmer. We fully agree with your officer's planning assessment of this scheme and welcome the recommendation for approval. The site is allocated for residential development within the neighborhood plan and follows on from a previously approved and implement permission for 4 two-story dwellings. The redevelopment of this site is therefore considered acceptable in principle, since development of the site is supported by both the adopted policy and the planning history for residential development. There has been a great deal of correspondence on density through the determination of this application. As set out within your officer's report, the site density, calculated at approximately 15 dwellings per hectare, is clearly within the 20 dwellings per hectare limit set out within the neighborhood plan. It is furthermore lower than the local plan suggested density of 20 to 30 dwellings per hectare for village locations. This is reflective of the careful consideration that has gone into the design of this scheme to ensure that the proposal is appropriate given the context of the surrounding development. The increase in density of the scheme is clearly beneficial in making a more efficient use of the site and will, in our view, have no detrimental impact on the surrounding area in character or residential amenity terms. In this respect, the proposal for a single-story development represents a reduction in scale from the previously approved two-story scheme. The previous approval is considered to have a greater impact with regards to overlooking and overbearing of neighboring properties, as well as having a greater impact in the character terms, being more visible from surrounding areas. The architectural design of the proposal is considered to be of an exceptionally high quality, which draws reference from the surrounding development whilst complementing the character of the area. The access is acceptable and sufficient parking has been provided within the site for residents. The proposal provides for a high-quality landscaping scheme benefiting the character of the area and local biodiversity. In all other matters, the scheme is considered acceptable, and we ask, therefore, that members look on this application favorably and grant planning permission. And that concludes the first of the 2 representations in support of this application, Chair, and I'll move on to the second. And this is from Paul Templeton of Baobab, and Paul is the applicant. The shutdown associated with COVID-19 permitted us time for reflection. We were acutely aware of the displeasure our neighbors had with the extant permission, and we saw this as an opportunity to address their concerns as best we could. Over and above a desire to see this plot undeveloped, their main concerns were the heights of the permitted houses and the consequent issues with loss of privacy and the design of these houses, which they felt did not respect the local character that they had cherished. We went back to the drawing board and devised a scheme that comprised single-story dwellings respecting and reflecting the local typology and material vernacular. We had numerous meetings with neighbors of the Westbourne Action Group to discuss this proposed new scheme, which we had hoped would go some way to resolving the issues that they were unhappy about. We were pleased to receive positive feedback from the neighbors who felt this was a more appropriate solution to the site, and the action group confirmed that their only objection was one of density. We went to great lengths to address their concerns over density, showing that they were both below the local prevailing precedent as well as the parameters set out in the neighborhood plan. Indeed, the allocation of 12 houses for this site in the neighborhood plan would result in a density far larger than this proposal. When assessing the site for a new scheme, we felt that a proposal of 6 houses far better suited the site and declined going for a larger number as prescribed in the as prescribed in the neighborhood plan, believing the bucolic setting justified this. We are very proud and protective of our approach to development, and we stand by our desires as developers to create spaces and schemes that make best and sustainable use of our sites, respecting their setting, are driven by design and not bottom line, and are characterized by a level of quality in the delivery. Whilst we are obviously unable to cater to every demand of our stakeholders, we do our best to find the point of best compromise between their desires, the commercial constraints associated with the development, and what we consider the best solution to the site. We are very proud of this alternate scheme that we have devised for the site. We feel it caters to the local need for accessible single-story houses, that it contributes to the housing requirement within the village, that it respects the local character in its design and material palette, that it addresses the concerns of our neighbors, and that it justifiably sits below the recommended density threshold given its setting at village edge. And lastly, and most importantly, it will provide housing of a high quality design with a good balance of internal and external space, maximizing the enjoyment of living in this fantastic village. To this end, we respectfully ask that members grant planning permission for this scheme. And that concludes the second representation in support of planning application LW/20/0795. And we will move on to the final written representation. And this is a statement to be read on behalf of Councillor Johnny Denis in his capacity as the Lewes District Ward Councillor. Dear members of the Planning Applications Committee, today I'm addressing you at a distance as a district councillor for the Ouse Valley and Ringmer Ward. The property associated with this application lies to the rear of Westbourne, a house on the at very times very busy and at very times very fast Lewes Road on the southern entry to Ringmer. I would like the committee to consider rejecting this application on the grounds of density, character, and safety. The context: the available site has extant permissions. The principle of developing the site is not hereby questioned. The report makes error of highlighting the benefits of building on the site near local services as opposed to building out this particular development as a justification of this application. I'd like the committee to recognize that I am not objecting to any development on this site, already identified elsewhere as a development site. I am objecting to this application principally on the grounds of density, character, safety, and amenity. Firstly, density. The proposal, simply put, suggests a development density not in keeping with the surrounding densities. It does this by including the access road. Normally on a site, a road might be a relevant factor when surrounded by houses. But when, as it is here, it is merely a road to a development, it is spurious to include the length of the road within your density measurements. The development of homes is evidently too concentrated. A comparison to surrounding properties will make this obvious. The density on this site leaves residents with little amenity, parking and roads being the largest outdoor spaces, hardly amenity. Character. This committee report talk about having its own character. That is shorthand for it is not in keeping and does not reflect the character of the surrounding detached bungalows. This uncharacteristic development is therefore contrary to the Ringmer Neighborhood Plan Policy 9.1 and various policies within the local plan. Safety and amenity. This site has significant parking requirements in line with the neighborhood plan, yet the access is narrow and between the main road and the proposed homes. Cars leaving their parking would have to hope for a clear run, example, no cars entering the site. Traffic from the main road would have to hope there was no traffic coming up the road and to avoid having to stop on the main road or reverse into traffic. There appears to be no pedestrian priority and sanctuary from vehicles. A site within a few minutes walk of the village center fails to put pedestrian and cycle access first. This density, already mentioned on the site, leaves residents with little amenity, parking and roads being the largest outdoor spaces, hardly amenity. While the proposed increase in biodiversity is an untested claim, the gardens and trees on this site, which have already been cleared, have evidently not been factored into this claimed gain. With warm regards, Councillor Johnny Denny, Cabinet Member for Customers and Communities, and Ward Councillor for Ouse Valley and Ringmer Ward, Lewes District Council. And that concludes the representations in respect of this application, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palmer and Mrs. Norman. So we are now going to turn to councillors for their comments. Members of the committee, the first hand I see is Councillor, I think it was Councillor Saunders, and then Councillor O'Connor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I go into some detail on the application, could I just ask Mr. Hill, maybe after I've spoken, to just go through what the biodiversity gains are from this development? Because what I can see at the moment is the hedging and the green roofs. If you could just clear that up, but maybe after I've just spoken. Basically, having listened to all the objectors, one thing I certainly do agree with is that we really must and should therefore recognise the neighbourhood plans that are in place, and I'm all for that. However, the officers that have actually set out that effectively this application does meet things like density within the plan as it's set out. They've clearly set out the calculations that prove that. The change in design from 2-storey to 1 also reduces the impact on neighbouring properties, and I recognise that too. The parking provision is within highways requirements. So again, that appears to meet the requirements of both the plan and the planning regulations. The drainage issues that are mentioned are something that the applicant is going to need to agree, and it mentions that in the report with Southern Water. But I don't think it's really for this committee to consider that, other than the recommendation of the officers, which is set out on page 27, item number 6. I would like to see added to the conditions the timings to be restricted to take account of the development being in a residential area. I think that's something that as a committee we've recognised in the past and want to do so in the future. I'd also like to see, or would have liked to have seen, PVs on the roofs of the bungalows. I recognise that some of the bungalows are east-west facing rather than north-south, but the ones at the end of the site could certainly take PV panels. And I know it's mentioned, I believe, in paragraph 886, where the design and access statement lists potential for PV panels, but it would have been nice to have actually seen them on the drawings. But as I say, if I could go back and maybe at the end, either of this or when everybody else has spoken, just to find out what the biodiversity gains which are mentioned actually are, other than the hedging and the green roofs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Saunders. In terms of biodiversity gains overall on the site, obviously the obvious one of the cedar roofs on the flat roof elements, but The report makes it very clear that further details and enhancements can be secured through the use of a landscaping condition, and that is indeed included within condition 12, which requires details of the green roof planting, for example, and the ecological enhancements. And paragraph 8.8.3 lists some of those potential gains in terms of mammal gates on the fencing throughout and the planting. In addition to that, we also have the sustainability. You mentioned the solar panels, and again, there is a condition which condition 14 on page 30 requires the applicant to submit those details to us. And you're looking at the bungalows there. Yes, it is only the two at the southern part of the site, the lower part of the site, whose roofs are probably orientated to benefit from some PV panels. And I'm sure the applicant is here tonight, and if the members agree with the recommendation, that they will have heard that and can submit those details to us as part of the discharge of condition 14.
Councillor Saunders, are you content with that?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. If you want to come back for a proposer, I'm happy to do that when you've heard everyone speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. I just want to reiterate, Councillor Saunders, he did ask for a condition as far as the timings, and I believe that officers have taken that on board. Yes, thank you.
Yes, that's no problem.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hill. I see Councillor O'Connor and then Councillor Manley, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Chair. I note the objections and the objections regarding density have been covered by Mr. Hill, but I also note the objections regarding character. And on the one side, we've got bungalows with larger plots. On the other side, we've got large houses or larger houses with large plots. And here we have some bungalows on relatively smaller plots. So I'm just noting that. So I'm not sure that it is in character with the area. I'm not making a comment whether that's good or bad, but it's not in character in my view. I would be interested in comments regarding affordability of this housing, whether there is any question that it will be anything close to affordable. And I would ask Mr. Hill about SIL and whether that, what the benefits are to the community from this development, apart from satisfying a clear housing need that, applies everywhere, not just here in Ringmer. And I would wonder about, the constraints that's been placed upon the developers by the costs involved with the drainage and whether that's had an impact. But that's not really a question to Mr. Hill, that's just merely a comment. So at this stage, Chair, I am interested in the debate, and I'm interested in Mr. Hill's comments on this before I say either way whether I'm in favour or not of this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. Mr. Hill, would you like to address those points, please?
Yes, Chair, very briefly. Yes, it would be still liable. No, there's no affordable housing. It's under that threshold. In terms of the overall character, again, that's open to interpretation. If you look at the form of the buildings, I think you'd be hard-pushed to say that they're not in character when the greater proportion of the buildings immediately adjacent and abutting the site are bungalows. That being said, yes, the plots are smaller than many of the surrounding bungalow plots, but at the end of the day, the local plan has set a threshold and a density limit, and certainly this scheme does fall within that threshold.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Councillor O'Connor, content with the response?
Yes, Chair. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Manley, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Manley. I'm also concerned about the density, but I understand it seems to be within the neighbourhood plan, but I would prefer to see plots with larger gardens. A quick question is just that on the presentation we were shown foundations that had already been built, and I just wondered, do they match what would be built, or will they need to be demolished and then rebuilt? That's just a quick question. And secondly, if the committee is to approve plans, I just wanted to include on page 24 what is it? Suggestions about bat and bird boxes, hedgehog-friendly fences, fruit trees, and green roofs. I just wondered if they could be put as a condition that it's explained exactly how and what these are going to be. For example, which type of green roof to make sure it's the most successful, and just a slightly more detailed information on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manning. Mr. Hill.
Yes, there's no reason why we couldn't. Condition 12 does specify the scheme shall include the following details of ecological enhancements, and we could put in brackets after that to include details, for example, of, and then list those things that are covered in paragraph 8.8.3 and or any other measures that they may consider that they could incorporate within the scheme. In terms of foundation design, I'm afraid it's not really a planning matter. I'm sure that if the footprint of the bungalow actually could incorporate work which has already been done, it would save them some money in terms of having to dig out and to relay. But looking at the plans that I showed you, the foundations of that unit are pretty much on the same location as the one of the pair of semi-detached. So it may be that the developer would utilise those, but it's not really a planning matter.
Councillor Manning.
That's great, thank you.
You are content. Thank you. Councillor Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. Having read the report a few times and listened to all the statements made so far, I'm inclined to go in favour of the officer's recommendation, and I'm happy to put that forward as a proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Thank you. I don't see any more hands up. Okay, so are there any more comments?
Chair, mine was.
Councillor Saunders?
Councillor MacLeod, no, my hand was up.
There you are. Excuse me, Councillor MacLeod, you didn't come up and I
No, that's all right. My camera's not working for some reason, so I'm sorry.
Councillor Shaw MacLeod.
Is it okay to just pass some comments?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, okay. I mean, as I'm more councillor for Ringmer, and I know Lewes. I share some similar concerns, especially the density. I mean, that's probably the biggest one, my biggest issue with it all. Are there any kind of gripes to going back and saying, can't you stick to the 4? That was originally agreed? Because I just think 6 is too many for the site personally.
Mr. Hill.
Well, you've heard this many times before. We've got to decide what's in front of us tonight, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Saunders, you're coming back. I see your hand. Thank you.
Yes, just quickly, Chair, just to come back on Councillor O'Connor's comment about how many affordable properties on the site. I would just say that instead of houses or even detached bungalows, we've now got in front of us semi-detached bungalows, which are, by virtue of the fact that they are smaller semi-detached properties, will be cheaper and more affordable. I know that that's a moot point in Ringmer because everything's is less affordable than anywhere else I know. But I would suggest that these smaller properties, being semi-detached, will be more affordable, and it's quite nice to see that there are 3-bedroom properties, so they would still work with a family, full family accommodation. So just to note that, Chair, and as I said, I'm more than happy if you want to come forward or requiring a proposer, I'm more than happy to propose acceptance. But I'm quite happy equally to defer to Councillor Jones, who also said he was happy to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Saunders. I don't see any more hands up. Actually, I do believe that Councillor Saunders first came up with a proposal, Councillor Jones. So I shall accept Councillor Saunders' proposal. Councillor Jones, would you then second Councillor Saunders' proposal, please?
I will.
Thank you.
Chair, Mrs. Stone wishes to speak, but that was obviously with that condition imposed on restriction of working hours. Thank you, Chair.
Correct. I was going to run through that. Mrs. Stone, thank you.
Oh, well, I don't want to spoil your thunder, Councillor Davey, but I just wanted to say, yes, the two things that have been mentioned during the debate is the earlier request to add an hours of work condition, and also the requirement for bat and bird boxes to be added to condition 12, and that condition to include the other requirements in paragraph 883 of the report.
Yes, this is what I have too. Are we all clear on that?
Thank you.
Good, thank you. So we're all clear on those amended and added conditions, yes? So we have a proposal on the table from Councillor Saunders, and that is to accept the officer's recommendation and to grant planning permission with those amended conditions. I'm going to go through the roll call and ask each councillor in turn to vote whether they for, against or abstain. Councillor Graham Amy, for, against or abstain, please.
Councillor Graham Amy, for.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Doohig, for, against, abstain, please.
Councillor Linda Doohig, for. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Tom Jones, for, against, abstain, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Jim Lord, for, against, abstain, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sylvia Lord, for, against, abstain, please.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Makepeace, for, against, abstain, please.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Millie Manley, please.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Sean McLeod, please.
Against, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence O'Connor, please.
Councillor Lawrence O'Connor, against.
Thank you. Councillor Saunders, please. For, against, abstain.
Councillor Saunders, for.
Thank you. Have we included everyone so far? Yes, I think we have. So I'm going to go over to Mrs. Stone for her to give us the result of the vote, please, with the amended conditions. Mrs. Stone, please.
Yes, that vote is carried, 6 votes to 4.
Thank you very much. So that is application number LW/20/0795, location land rear of Westbourne, Lewes Road, Ringmer, East Sussex, BN8 85ES. Proposal, erection of 6 semi-detached, single-storey residential dwellings, ward, Ouse Valley and Ringmer. Applicant, TSA Brighton Limited. Recommendation was to approve subject to the amended conditions, and that application has been recommended for granting planning permission. For the general public, this committee will be taking a very short break to just run over some extra material that has come forth to this committee. So if you can give us perhaps a few minutes, and we will be returning very quickly. If I can just ask Democratic Services to possibly deal with that, and shall we say stay on screen. Thank you everyone very much for that brief interlude. We're going to go straight back to the agenda, which is agenda item 9, which is on actually page 33, and that is the application number LW/20/0565, location 3 Chinnington Way, Seaford, BN25 4JA. Proposal demolition of existing property and erection of 2 4-bedroom detached houses. Applicant Mr. C. Bryans, Ward Seaford East. Recommendation: grant planning permission subject to conditions. Mr. Hill, please. Thank you.
Application at 3 Chinnington Way, Seaford. This is the site located at the roundabout at the western end of Chinnington Way and on its northern side. You can see from the site plan here that the existing bungalow, which accommodates or which is sited on the plot, is angled towards the junction and wraps around with a garage at its eastern boundary. The proposal is to demolish the existing bungalow, which is outlined here in the dashed line, and to replace it with a pair of detached dwelling houses. The dwelling on the eastern side has a garage and also space out the front for 2 vehicles to park. The property on the western side has its own driveway and no garage, but open forecourt parking to the front of the building. The buildings are aligned so they don't project beyond the rear elevation of the sort of defined building line here, and certainly the adjacent property at number 5. And again, a very similar projection at the front, so they sit very comfortably within that corridor of front and rear elevations. This is the floor plan for the eastern dwelling. Very simple. All meets our 4-bedroom dwelling. Meets our floor space standards, the national prescribed floor space standards. Very simple form. And the other property on the western side, again with a very similar form. And again, 4 good-sized bedrooms, all meeting the national space standards. This is the elevation from Chinnington Road itself, just showing you the outline of the existing bungalow. And you can see that the 2 dwellings are slightly larger, higher than the existing, but no higher than the apex of the roof of the adjacent property at number 5. And again, they've been designed to push off the boundary with number 5, with the cat slide sloping roof over the garage, and the main bulk of the building set further back from the common boundary. Good separation, approximately 2 metres between the 2 dwellings themselves, and again a very similar architectural feature on the roadside to the west. In terms of the site, I'm just going to run through some photographs. This is the building in question, the bungalow, and as you can see, it's articulated here and wraps round the corner. This is the adjacent property, number 5. And again, just looking, standing over on this side, just in front of number 5, looking back to the front of the building, and you can see the open plan nature of the site itself. So the dwelling would sit level with the front of this building and extend to the second building behind the tree here. This is just looking from the roundabout and looking back towards that eastern flank facing gable, western facing gable there. Again, just showing the variety of buildings in the vicinity, really. You know, this is a bungalow and there's another bungalow to the rear of the site. But along Chinnington Way itself, as you can see from the photographs, these are quite large dwellings, good 2-storey dwellings in a variety of forms and architectural features. So there is no standard design former, which has been utilised along Chington Road itself. A couple of photos here from the back of the garden, looking to the rear of the bungalow and rear of number 5. And again, note that there are a couple of windows in the flank elevation of the adjacent property, but officers have been mindful of that and consider that due to the separation and the form of the design of the new dwelling and the sloping roof over the outshot and the garage, this wouldn't be prejudicial to amenity to the point of justifying a refusal, and that those rooms would still receive adequate daylight. From the site itself, which is just over here, just opposite, again, there's a pair of detached houses which are very similar in terms of their design, with the projecting bay, the hipped roof going back to the main ridge, and the pyramidal type roof. So 2 house forms that have already been built and are very similar to what is proposed on this site. And the bottom photo here, again, just showing the variety of the forms, but noticeably just the bulk and scale of the dwellings along this stretch of Chington Way. Certainly further up, there are more bungalows on the southern side of the road. And again, looking at the roundabout itself, and the access would come out of here for the second of the 2 dwellings. There's a bungalow to the rear, and there's a couple of bungalows on the other side of the roundabout, but very much it's almost an end stop to that street scene in terms of on the corner and the roundabout bungalow there, which sits against quite large 2-storey and robust dwellings of various architectural features. So I don't think there's a lot really to add to the report, Chair. The area is set out as an area of established character, and the description of that is set out on page 39. And that character is very much the spacious character, tree-lined wide grass verges between the highway and the pavements and the open plan front gardens. And I think your officer's view is such that it's not considered that the proposal itself would prejudice or compromise that character, and the built form is again very much in keeping with the adjacent houses and the houses that are sited directly opposite site, which I will not get to at the moment, but I'll play around with. I'll come back to that, Chair. Yes, the officers are recommending approval as set out.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. We're now going to call upon Mr. Lee Palmer and then Mrs. Jennifer Norman to read out the public speeches. Thank you, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Chair. Jennifer Norman, Democratic Services. Mr. Palmer is going to read out the objections on this application, and I'm going to read out the remaining. We're going to start. There are 8 written representations received in respect of planning application LW/20/0565, 1 from the town council, 3 in objection, 3 in support, and 1 on behalf of the Lewes District Ward Councillor. So we will start with the representation received from Seaford Town Council. And that's a statement received from Mr. Jeff Johnson, the planning officer, to be read on behalf of Seaford Town Council in respect of planning application LW/20/0565. The Town Council's objection to this application is set out in full in the officer's report. The application was debated at length. The members were aware of the many objections to the application, but the weight of those objections were not the determining factor. Chington Way is within one of the designated areas of special character in the Seaford Neighborhood Plan and the Lewes Local Plan Part 2. Both plans were adopted by the District Council at the same meeting in February 2020, so the plans and policies with them should carry maximum weight. The officer's report refers to the description of Chington Way in those plans and concludes that the proposed development will not compromise the reasons behind the special designation of the road. This is misleading. One of the principal reasons for the designation is the open character of the street scene, which is referred to several times in the report. A major element of this open character at the approach to the site from the roundabout at the western end is the existing bungalow lying at an angle to the other properties on the large corner plot. It is not listed and dates only from the 1950s, but it is still a distinctive building which makes a major contribution to the quality and character of this locality. This feature will be lost in reverting to the relative uniformity of detached two-story houses along the entire length of Chinkton Avenue, and the Town Council considered that in terms of government guidance under the National Planning Policy Framework, the benefit of the net gain of just one additional dwelling towards the district's housing requirement was firmly outweighed by the adverse impact on a street scene, which is specifically protected under recent local and neighborhood plan policies. The revised plans will show a cramped layout for the two new dwelling compared to the existing properties on the north side of Chinkton Way. The rear gardens are restricted in length through the backing onto one Chinkton Way. Although the site is adequate for the existing bungalow, it cannot accommodate two properties in scale with the existing layout without constituting overdevelopment. The proposed property adjacent to number 5 Chinkton Way will also have a significant adverse impact on that property through loss of light and general amenity. This clearly illustrated by the plan showing the proposed elevations and the current low-profile outline of the bungalow. There will be a sense of enclosure which will completely transform the current openness at this end of Chinkton Way. A consultant's report commissioned by the residents also shows that the proposed property will breach the established right of light enjoyed by number 5. There was also concern about highway safety issues. The approach to the site from Chinkton Road has limited visibility due to the roundabout. This is clearly illustrated in the plan at the heading of the report. The Highway Authority gave it cautious approval but did not take into account the likelihood of cars being parked in the road close to the proposed access. Also, the officer has miscalculated the parking provision. The only garage proposed in the scheme at House 1 is far too small to accommodate a modern car, and applying the Highway Authority's own residential parking guidelines, this reduces the actual provision from 4.6 to 4. The likelihood of additional vehicles being parked on both sides of the right-angled bend where these houses will be sited will present a serious hazard. It is accepted that as the District Council has been told that it does not have a 5-year supply of deliverable housing land, and that accordingly the presumption in favor of sustainable development in the National Planning Policy Framework should apply. However, in this application, for a net gain of just one dwelling, the Council is being recommended to approve a scheme that will have a serious adverse impact on an area of established character recently designated in the local and neighborhood plans. These local plan policies should still be the starting point for consideration of this application, and it is respectfully requested that the application should be refused on grounds based on the Town Council's objection. Sincerely, Jeff Johnson, Planning Officer, Seaford Town Council. And that concludes the Town Council's representation, and I will hand it over to Mr. Palmer to read the statements in objection. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, Lee Palmer, reading out the objections in opposition from local residents. We have 3 in number. The first is on behalf of Jackie and Bill Frost, neighbours to the development, in relation to application LW 20-0565. Policy CP2 requires developments to provide a range of dwelling types and sizes to meet identified need. We would ask how many large family-sized level access bungalows have been built in Seaford in the last 5 years. The application is to demolish one such property to replace it with 2 cramped 4-bedroomed detached houses. 162 new houses are being built on the old Newlands school site alone, none of which would meet the needs of a family with a member confined to a wheelchair. There is a distinct lack of housing suitable for families with a disabled member in the town. LDC has a duty of care to protect such dwellings that are accessible for all. Chinkton Way is an area of established character comprising a diverse mix of large properties with generous front and back gardens. The bungalow located on the prominent site is in this designated area of established character, makes a major contribution to the spacious feel of the immediate area. We disagree fundamentally with the planning officer's report stating the openness of the street will not be compromised by this proposed development. This proposal will represent an overdevelopment of the site in that the plots for the two houses are substantially smaller than those of the existing properties. The plot size of house 2 is less than 2/3 the size of the plots of the smallest nearest neighbouring two-storey house. Property 1 is only slightly larger than 2/3 of the smallest two-storey neighbouring house. The compromises involved squeezing two properties onto the existing site means that it will give the appearance of being cramped on their plots, which is completely out of character with the more spacious properties in the road. We dispute the planning officer's report regarding the parking provision. The garage of property 1 is well below the minimum size demanded by the East Sussex ESCC guidance for parking at new residential development report. As such, it is excluded from being classified as a parking space, resulting in the development falling short of the required parking spaces dictated by the ESCC parking calculator. Another example of two properties crammed onto an inadequate site. The drive of property 2 exists directly onto a roundabout alongside a substantial mature tree. Cars emerging from the drive will have their line of sight blocked by this tree. This extremely busy roundabout leads to a National Trust farmland and the South Downs National Park. It is also part of Route 2 of the National Cycle Network. The lack of sight when leaving the driveway will be potentially hazardous. The development replaces one dwelling with two, but at what cost? Two properties crammed onto a site, destroying the character of this part of the area of established character. Loss of distinctive family-sized level access bungalow. Dangerous exit onto a roundabout. Overshadowing, loss of light. Inadequate parking. It ignores several requirements of the local plan. Thank you, Chair. That concludes the representation on behalf of Jackie and Bill Frost. Moving on to the second objection received on behalf of Alan and Annie Green, near neighbours, in relation to this application. The proposed development at number 3 will overlook the gardens of number 5 and number 7 and directly overlooks the back gardens of houses in Chington Road. The plans overcrowd the plot and, sited 2 metres from number 5's west wall, will remove light views from that property's west-facing windows. The property's uniformity of the two houses will ruin the eclectic nature of this area of established character and could well impact on the value of neighbouring properties. In 2018, we consulted neighbours before spending a large sum of money on demolishing a conservatory and building a large single-storey extension and patio at our home at number 7, planning reference LW160369. In 2019, Brian's moved to number 3, telling neighbours he was going to convert the loft and modernise the bungalow. This was incorrect and contrary to his statements. Last year, he posted a planning application notice for 2 times 4 bedroom house, making no effort to consult with the neighbours in relation to his plans. The application was first submitted in August 2020, but inexplicably was not validated until October 2020. Since then, over 30 local residents and Seaford Town Council have objected in the strongest possible terms to the application. The large bungalow, modernised by Brian's, had first suggested, would be ideal for disabled families requiring easy wheelchair access. The Equality and Human Rights Commission report survey found local authorities largely ignored disability in their housing plans. Had Brian's consulted the community, he would have had support to develop the bungalow into an accessible home on the same footprint. I understand LDC are under pressure from national policy guidance in planning laws and requirements for a rolling 5-year housing supply. I appreciate this is important, but the focus should be on larger sites creating hundreds of houses. Why ruin an area of established character to create just one more property? The new signage and resulting increase in traffic to South Hill Barn has resulted in numerous near misses on the roundabout overlooked by number 3. While Brian's Works vehicles parked on the roundabout have contributed to this, it also gives an insight into the extra traffic problems that will be caused by another property on the plot, as the proposed design will see vehicles exiting directly onto the roundabout. COVID has affected us all, but I'm concerned that this application has not received the scrutiny and oversight it otherwise would have. Had this application been submitted for approval pre-COVID, a conventional meeting would have been called, the views of the overwhelming number of residents objecting to the application would have been fully aired, and the application quite rightly refused. This meeting ignores LDC's own statement of community involvement, July 2020, para 1.19 of the document that refers to transparency of neighbouring planning examination process. Paragraph 2.19 refers to the fact that the local community get involved in the plan making stage, as well as commenting on specific planning applications. That most certainly is not the case here. And that concludes the representations on behalf of Alan and Annie Green. Moving to the third and last objection, this has been received on behalf of Reverend Paul McMichael, a near neighbour in objection to this application. As a collective group of neighbours who have lived in the area for a number of years, we feel that this planning has to be stopped as it goes against several policies put in place by both yourselves, LDC and STC, and quite clearly by reading the other 3 reports which support the objection, it does not fulfil the requirements of planning required. The complete plots that both proposed houses are planned to be built on is almost 50% of the size of the neighbouring plots to the east of the existing house, which will clearly mean that both houses will look cramped and out of character. Add to the fact that the proposed houses take away the 45-degree angle of the existing property, it will have a closing in effect on the entrance to the streets, which is an area of established character. Also, when you add the fact that the garage in house 1 does not fulfil its requirements as an added car parking space, and the fact that the house fails to comply and breaches the right to light and the BRE guidance of 2011. Also, your attention has been brought to the fact that all other houses which face the roundabout are bungalow style, which means they are single-storey houses with upstairs loft conversions, and by building these 2 double-storey 4-bed houses, it is clearly an overdevelopment of a small site. We are fortunate to have a range of wildlife in the neighbourhood, including bats. We have a number of bats in our garden that can be seen swooping both near the bottom of the garden, near a large palm tree, and near our house, near the bamboo plant dividing the hedge between us and number 3. This would indicate that bats are roosting nearby. We would therefore expect confirmation that a bat survey has been completed on the current house, in the view of it considered demolition. And if one is not in place, that this is completed prior to the planning consideration. All council members are also aware of a separate objection noted by Penny McMichael, which should be treated in the strictest confidence and acknowledged as a valid reason in its own right to stand and oppose the considered planning application. The situation with the road, especially at the corner where house number 2's driveway will open onto is nothing but dangerous. 2 accidents in the past 18 months and many near misses. And so by giving the planning for another house, in turn adding more cars and traffic to a junction which is already busy with commercial and private vehicles from the existing property at number 3. Other reasons to reject: this will overshadow number 5 and 7's gardens, causing lack of light. They will overlook number 5's house, causing loss of privacy. It would significantly impact highway safety and restrict road access, noise, disturbance and pollution. Thank you, Chairman. That concludes the speech on behalf of Reverend Paul McMichael and concludes all the neighbour objections to this case. Thank you.
Mrs. Norman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I am going to read the 3 speeches in support of this application, and we will start with the first one, and this is on behalf of Hannah Ronan of Parker Dan, and Hannah is a planning consultant, and this is in support of planning application LW/20/0565. Good afternoon, members of the Planning Committee. This application has been proposed by the applicant with the aim of making efficient use of the site to provide 2 attractive family homes. The application comes before the committee following a previous withdrawn application made at this site. The applicant has worked hard to address the valuable feedback received from the planning officer and town council as part of the previous application. The merits of the amendments incorporated into the application before you following this feedback have been clearly acknowledged through the officer's positive recommendation of this application. The proposal has been carefully designed to ensure that it conserves and enhances the character of the area. When viewed with the street scene, the new dwellings will appear as a natural extension to the existing built development along the north side of Chinkton Way. This has been achieved through the proposed material palette, form and scale of the dwellings, and adherence to neighboring building lines and plot sizes. These aspects work together to ensure that the new dwellings will harmonize with the existing development, whilst also lifting the architectural profile of the area, resulting in an enhancement to the street scene. Policies DM34 and SEA5 seek to promote the retention of certain identified aspects of this locality, such as site coverage and spacious plots. The proposal unquestionably achieves this aim. Whilst the site currently poses a particular generous plot, the degree of openness afforded by this could be readily modified by aspects such as boundary treatments and utilization of other permitted development rights. The proposed dwellings will be served by designated driveways and spacious parking areas. This aspect of the proposal represents an improvement to the existing arrangement at the site, where adequate vehicle turning space does not exist. The Highway Authority have assessed the proposed access arrangement. The visibility displays proposed at the site are confirmed to be suitable, and a condition is recommended to ensure that displays are maintained. Paragraph 109 of the NPPF states that proposals should only be refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety. This is clearly not the case here, as confirmed by your Highway Authority. We would like to draw the committee's attention to paragraphs 118 and 127 of the NPPF, which encourage decision makers to promote and support the development of underutilized land, especially where this would be helpful, especially where this would help meet identified needs for housing where land supply is constrained and sites could be used more effectively. This application embodies these principles, providing numerous benefits, including much needed family homes in a popular, sustainable residential location. The officer's report confirms that the application complies with all the relevant policies contained within the development plan, with no adverse impacts identified which outweigh the benefits of the scheme. Consequently, we have strong grounds to consider that there is no defensible planning basis upon which this application could be refused. We therefore encourage the committee to support its officers' considered recommendations. Thank you. Now I'll move on to the second written representation in respect of this application. and it is from Faye Bryans. And Faye Bryans is the applicant, and she is speaking in support of planning application LW/20/0565. My name is Faye Bryans, and I am both owner applicant of the planning application at 3 Chington Way. I am a chartered architectural technologist with my own practice based in Seaford. My husband and I bought the existing rundown property in July 2019 with the intention of a full refurbishment, including dormers and extensions. However, the property is in bad condition, which made the proposals a lot more difficult. We took further advice from structural consultants, architectural colleagues, and planning consultants, and the current application was decided upon. Initially, we spoke to a number of immediate neighbors with regards to the application and received no negative responses. Therefore, we were shocked by the backlash. I have worked closely with the planners throughout the application process. The first application, the planners felt the properties were too large. However, with a number of alteration, we felt that there was merit in the proposals of 2 properties on the site. Therefore, the application was withdrawn, reconfigured, and the current application submitted. I have taken into consideration all previous comments from the last application and reduced the size of the properties as well as reducing the area of first floor space. I have also changed the finishes to closely match those of nearby properties. We do have a number of vehicles on the road, normally 2 cars and 1 van. This is due to waiting for this planning permission to be decided. We do not want our cars and vehicles on the road, but at the moment we have no choice. The proposed parking will make the current situation better. I have had numerous conversations with with the officer in regard to this application, and I have made some slight amendments, including widening a driveway. This was the only recommendation from East Sussex Highways, who otherwise have given their full consent. I have also worked with the planning consultants, and we have found none of the objections to be sound in planning terms. We are aware of correspondence being circulated locally advising people to object to our application, as well as town council members being lobbied. The proposed pair of houses that we have designed match other nearby properties and we believe complement the area. The existing white sprawling bungalow does not. There are much smaller gardens in close proximity to this application, namely those on the corner with Southway, 16 and 18 Chington Way. In response to one particular inaccurate objection, the road is not dangerous or treacherous. It is actually very quiet. The proposals are not an overdevelopment. They will be considerably more off-road parking available. The houses would have substantial gardens and would also allow 2 families to enjoy this location. We intend to continue to live in this lovely corner of Seaford and one of the properties. We would not consider building anything that is detrimental to the street scene or area generally. We are pleased the application is going to committee with a recommendation to approve from the Lewes District Council Planning Department. And thank you, Chair. That concludes the second of 3 written representations in support of this application, and I'll move on to the final one, and it is from Ms. Sarah Dwelly, who is the near neighbor to this application. I live with my young family at number 2 Chington Way. We have lived here for 4 years. We live almost directly opposite 3 Chington Way, and we support this application. We feel the current property is out of character and does not look out of place does look out of place within the street. For my property, the current bungalow looks large and out of place. 2 houses would be much more in proportion and be more in character with the area. This area is seeing more young families moving in, and I think this would be a good opportunity for another 2 families to be able to enjoy this area. We hope that this application is approved. With kindest regards, Sarah Dwelly. And I'll move on to the final written representation received in respect of planning application LW/20/0565, and that is from a Councillor Sam Ananiji on behalf of Councillor Julian Peterson. And just to clarify, Councillor Julian Peterson is the ward councillor, and Councillor Sam Adeniji is speaking on his behalf in his capacity as the Lewes District ward councillor. I am Councillor Sam Adeniji. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the ward councillor for Seaford East, who is currently indisposed. I urge you to reject the proposal on the following grounds. 1, overlooking. The proposed development will overlook the adjoining properties in Chinkton Way and the properties in Chinkton Road. It will overlook and overshadow its neighbor in Chinkton Way, leading to a loss of light, as well as overlooking bedroom, living, and dining room of the property in Chinkton Road, as well as overlooking the terrace and patio area, leading to a loss of privacy. Both properties will be materially affected by this proposed development. The assertion in the report that no overlooking will take place if the development goes ahead is wrong. Second, out of character. The footprint of the proposed dwellings, width of the proposed properties, and spacing between them is not in keeping and is out of character with other properties in Chinkton Way. Squeezing 2 properties onto the existing site means they will give the appearance of being cramped on their plots, which is completely out of character with the more spacious properties in the road. A key feature of Chinkton Way is the open character of the properties on that street. The proposed to cram 2 dwellings on this plot would detract from the open character of Chinkton Way and therefore is not keeping with the characteristics of other properties on Chinkton Way. This is in contrary to policies SEA 5 of the Seaford Neighborhood Plan and DM 34 of the Lewes Local Plan Part 2. Number 3, overdevelopment. The assertion that the footprint of the dwellings, the width of the plots, and spacing between the site boundaries would also be directly comparable with neighboring properties is inaccurate. The proposed development involves loss of garden land and open aspect of the neighborhood. The green area currently adjacent to proposed development will be lost. This is a typical example of garden grabbing. The proposed development will represent an overdevelopment of this site and would therefore be contrary to DM 25 of the Lewes Local Plan Part 2. Number 4, traffic. Whilst East Sussex County Council Highways have not made any objections, I urge the committee not to discount the concerns raised by local residents. Chinkton Way is a corner plot set back from the road. Its current layout allows for a clear sight when approaching the road about of traffic approaching along Chinkton Way. In summary, I urge you to refuse the planning application on the following grounds. 1, adverse effect on the residential amenity of neighbors by reason of overlooking, loss of privacy, and overshadowing. 2, unacceptably high density over development of the site and loss of garden land or the open aspect of the neighborhood, example, garden grabbing. 3, visual impact of the development. 4, effect of the development on the character of the neighborhood. And 5, the proposed development is overbearing, out of scale, or out of character in terms of its appearance compared with existing development in the vicinity. And lastly, 6, the loss of existing views from neighboring properties would adversely affect the residential amenity of neighboring owners. And thank you, Chair. That concludes the representations received in respect of planning application LW/20/0565.
Thank you, Mrs. Norman. Thank you, Mr. Palmer. We're over to the committee for your comments, please. And first of all, Mrs. Stone, who is our Lewes District Council planning solicitor, would like to speak. Thank you, Mrs. Stone.
Very briefly, Chair. Those representations raised a few legal issues I'll just very quickly raise with the committee. One speaker referred to a letter sent to councillors in confidence. I'm not going to refer to the contents of that letter, but would remind members that the impact of a construction period is not a material planning consideration that you can take into account when considering the application. There was some suggestion that the council has a duty of care to protect bungalows. That's not a correct position in law. There's no case that has determined the councils have that type of duty of care. And also reference has been made to the council's 5-year housing land supply position. The current position is the council does have a 5-year housing land supply position. Therefore, we can consider our local plan to be up to date, and you should determine this application in accordance with that plan. I hope that clarifies the legal issues that were raised, but any questions, I'll be happy to assist.
Thank you, Mrs. Stone. I'm sure any of the committee might turn to you for any more help in that direction. First of all, I see a hand from Councillor O'Connor, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mrs. Norman and Mr. Palmer, for their long reading out of all the objections and supporting comments. I'm very grateful to them for that onerous task, for undertaking that onerous task. I'd like to raise a few points in respect of this planning application, some of which we'll seek to get a little bit more clarification from Mr. Hill. I wondered whether it would be possible to have some sort of condition regarding the time of building, the allowable times for building during the day, and possibly bearing in mind it does lead to up to Seaford Head, whether it could be stipulated that the building didn't take place at weekends. So I'm not sure whether that's a feasible condition, but it might be worth the committee considering that and seeing if Mr. Hill thinks that's a reasonable thing. And of course, building to be limited to sort of like 8:30 to 6 o'clock or something like that. I'm not sure what the normal times are, but something like that during the weekdays. I would also be interested, there was some mention in one of the objections about a bat survey, whether it's possible for that to be undertaken or stated. It may already be there, but I'm sure Mr. Hill will point me in the right direction if I haven't picked up on that. There's another issue that's been raised in the objections and in the many letters, which I'm sure all of us have read as councillors, that we've had from local residents, and for which we're grateful because it has helped us to get an understanding of all of this. But there's the question of the garage width has been mentioned, whether that's a material consideration, whether that's a factor. I also note many objectors have mentioned about the road and the traffic and this sort of thing, and we have to rely on the experience, the skill, the professional skill of the reports that we've received from East Sussex County Council Highways in respect of that matter. So I'm just making that as a comment. And the next thing I'd like to mention was the open character of the area there. Yes, this bungalow has an open character on the corner there. It's a corner plot. In the past when we've had the ability to go out for walks, I've been along there, and it is a beautiful area. It's a beautiful leading up to Seaford Head, and the bungalow itself has an open aspect to it. But it's not quite in keeping with the rest of the area, which are mostly houses. There are a few bungalows, but mostly houses in the area. So I'm wondering about that as a character definition point. But I would ask whether it's possible to say, if the committee was minded to approve this application, whether it was possible to sort of retain a little bit of the open character by stipulating that there'll be no walls plant in front. I notice the plans don't have any walls in the front there, and clearly there are cars going from the front of the building, front of the proposed property. But I would ask that we, clearly stipulate that there would be no fences or walls placed that lead up to the footpath there. Thank you, Chair. Those were my comments. I would retain the right, if possible, to come back if something else comes out that I would like clarification on, or to perhaps discuss with fellow councillors. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. Well, there are quite a few points there, Mr. Hill. I think the garage specification is an interesting point. And then Councillor O'Connor suggested a condition. He then wanted to discuss as far as keeping the area open and not having any fences as such. I think I've covered that at Councillor O'Connor. Those were your points, I believe. So perhaps we can go to Mr. Hill to cover those points, please. First of all, we have the garage specification. Thank you, Mr. Hill.
Yeah, very, very briefly, in terms of hours of work and restricting it to not at weekends, the usual restriction is only Saturday mornings, only allow Saturday morning working anyway. I think we'd be pushing it to restrict Saturday morning working. It's usually only from 8:30 or 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and that's it. So I'd be tempted to say I can't see a justification for limiting it only to weekdays, but that's for the committee to decide. You mentioned about bats. Yes, there wasn't a bat survey. It would be against the law to harm any area, any building that has roosting bats. I'm not aware of a survey having been undertaken, but in view of the representations we received, we could put if members felt it necessary, a condition on just to have a survey done of the roof space of the bungalow to ascertain whether or not there are any roosting bats. And even if there are, you can deal with that with a licensed bat handler and they can be relocated. Garage size, yes. I think personally that garage is tight, and I'd probably just about be able to squeeze out of a car parked in there. But I was looking at one of the other photographs, and quite ironically, one of the houses opposite, so I can share this photo with you, indeed has a garage, and it has 2 cars parked on its driveway. So you do question with a lot of these, there's another one here, you do question how many garages are actually used for garaging of vehicles. But that being said, looking at the surrounding roads, there are no restrictions on the road itself in terms of parking. It's quite a wide road, as you can see. And again, there are vehicles that are parked around the front onto the roundabout anyway, and you can see the road width there. So notwithstanding the size of the garage, which I haven't measured, but I certainly would suggest is actually quite small in terms of getting some of your larger SUVs and things in there. I don't think that would be achievable. But again, the site does have, both sites have space for 2 vehicles off street anyway. So I think that notwithstanding the size of the garage, I would not be advising a refusal based on the fact that there's one parking space less if that garage wasn't proved to be suitable for your average vehicle. Finally, in terms of keeping the frontage open, yes, there is a wall already at the side of the property, as you saw in the photographs there, but the general feel for the front along Chington Way is quite open. And yes, we could put a condition on and restrict any boundary treatment other than natural hedging and planting on the front gardens if members feel that that is something they wish to impose.
Thank you, Mr. Hill, and thank you, Chair. I'm content with those answers, subject to what I hear later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. It is Councillor Saunders, then it's Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to go back to the issue of the egress from the building, which is onto the roundabout, effectively. I was looking back at page 13 on the previous report, which has got the design manual for roads and bridges, etc. And it says that you need 90 metres within a 30-mile-per-hour zone on the roadway. Now I note that it is a roundabout. It's only one way, and cars should be slowing down there. But we've already heard that this road is the main feeder for people going up to the South Barn and enjoying the national park. So I'm a little bit concerned that seems to be not really mentioned in this report, where it was mentioned in the last report. I agree with Councillor O'Connor about the hours of working, and it would have been nice to have seen it restricted to not at weekends, but I understand from Mr. Hill that it's not really feasible. It is a bit of a shame. Also, I was noting the objections about the loss of light into number 5, and that's particularly into the garden, I would suggest, of number 5 and possibly number 7, Chington Way as well. Could Mr. Hill just go over that area of the loss of light into those properties and any effect that will have now with the 2-storey houses going in? So if he could go into that as well. I would, however, support the fact that the houses do look quite in keeping with the other ones along the road. They're in that sort of Sussex style. I quite like that. And you could argue that the bungalow there is out of keeping as it is at the moment. But as I say, I am concerned about the visibility as you exit the first of those properties, the one to the west. and the effects of parking, etc., outside that property, and what that's now going to do with regards to the traffic in the area. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think let's go back to Mr. Hill to address those particular points, please.
Yes, in terms of the light, you can see this is the front elevation showing the adjacent property. It's got a dormer window or an eaves dormer in the front, and there's 2 windows on the flank. You can see the outline here of the existing bungalow. This is it, it's sort of attached garage, and then you can see how that relates to the building, the roof of the main dwelling house itself. There's good separation there. But yes, I mean, anything on that western side is going to have an impact, but the windows in question, there's 2 which I believe, according to the report, are secondary bedroom windows. There they are there. There's one either side of that chimney breast. Secondary windows to this room and to the room at the back, which is this dormer here. There's the secondary window. You don't have a right to light. Right to light isn't a planning issue, but we do assess an application in terms of light to that room and whether that would detrimentally impact on amenity. In view of the fact that, as the report states, these are secondary windows and the front and the rear are the main windows, they're quite small anyway. The orientation and the fact that the design of the dwelling itself pitches away, and it's got quite a nice deep pitch there, taking it away from the dwelling. Again, I think it would be difficult to sustain a reason for refusal in terms of amenity. The report makes it clear that there will be some impact, but your officer's view is that that impact is not so great as to justify a refusal in terms of detrimental impact to amenity. In terms of the access, just reminding members, this is the access quite close to the corner, and there's a significant tree here, so it would access out onto the roundabout. And just for reminding you, vehicles will be travelling in this direction to go round the roundabout or to go back along Chington Way. So as you're coming out of this drive, you've certainly got good visibility to oncoming traffic in that direction. And as I say, they've just negotiated the roundabout at the top of the screen there. So that in itself is a speed limiting factor. In terms of access along Chington Way, there's a give way sign here as you come along and access onto the roundabout. And again, if you come out of the drive, this is where the drive would be just off this screen here in this top photo, and you can see the give way line. So as you're coming along Chington Way, you would have very good view, even if you pulled out looking to go round the roundabout or to come round Chington Way of any vehicles coming there. So I think in terms of safety, and your officers would have assessed that as a driver accessing from that drive, that providing no other structures or planting is placed on the verge, there's no reason why as you edge out from that drive, that visibility would be impeded. And as I say, you can see the tree in the other photo, and that doesn't in any way impede visibility back towards Chington Way and the oncoming traffic.
Councillor Saunders, are you content with the explanations?
Yes, Chair, I am. Just the only other couple of little points sorry to add, and it doesn't require any comments from Mr. Hill. I'm disappointed not to see PVs again on this one. The neighbouring properties has got PVs, and maybe we can the planning department can discuss that with the applicant as part of the conditions, possibly. Or and the only other item is item 8 on this report. I think we've all discussed this before. I'm slightly concerned in its wording. It tends to sort of predispose that permission is granted. Item 8 says that development hereby permitted shall be carried out in accordance with. And I'm really disappointed at that wording. We've all had conversations about that, I know, but I'd like to see that changed in the future. We as planning committee members are always urged not to predetermine, but this one seems to show that the officers at least have predetermined this application. But I think that the officers are going to take that on board for future reports. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Just running on to what Councillor Saunders said. The trees, we have mentioned the trees, and they do give this area of established character a feeling with its spaciousness. Is there any way that they can be conditioned to be retained, Mr. Hill, please?
Which trees in particular are we discussing?
The ones that are literally outside on the main road there, all around.
If they're on the main road, they won't be under the control of the applicant. They'll be down to the Highway Authority.
Okay, thank you very much for that. It's Councillor Jones, then it will be Councillor Amy, then it will be Councillor Lord, as in Jim Lord. Councillor Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. Two points. First one I picked up on was when Councillor O'Connor mentioned the fencing, and I suddenly remembered seeing the photograph, which in fact did have fencing around. But I take note of what Mr. Hill said, that what we could do is make a condition that there isn't any fencing there and that it is a hedging or some form of flower arrangement along the edge of that instead of having that rather stark boundary. So that's the first one. The other one was comment made by one of the objectors that this would bring the houses too close together, unlike the other houses along Chington Way. Well, I'm looking at the map at the beginning of the report, and I see houses very, very close to each other, and probably the same amount or more so than the two new houses which are being proposed. So I don't really see that as a solid reason to object to this planning application. That's all I have at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. We're now over to Councillor Amy, please. And I see Mrs. Sterling going to be coming in.
Yeah, just picking up, please, Chair. Sorry, Councillor Amy, just on the point that Councillor Saunders raised about some potential predetermination. Chair, it is standard wording for conditions to refer to the development permitted. These are suggested conditions on behalf of the council in the event planning permission is granted. And there should be no suggestion that the wording, the development hereby permitted, shall be carried out in accordance with the following plans, to be any suggestion that the case officer has made a judgment. She's made a recommendation that the application be approved subject to those conditions. And I think that legal point needs to be made clear at this juncture. Thank you.
Chair, all I would say on that is it just needs the word "if hereby permitted," and then it would be absolutely acceptable to everyone. But if you're suggesting, Mrs. Stone, that that's legal speak, I accept that. But I just think it doesn't read properly to me. That's all. Sorry.
Yeah, that's the recommendation. It's the officer's duty to put forward a recommendation to this committee. And we couldn't hedge our bets on every single condition, otherwise they wouldn't be clear and precise, and we need to do that in the event of the conditions being transferred from this report into the decision notice.
Okay, there are some very pertinent points that have been put forward. We're now over to Councillor Amy, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think most of my points have been answered. I was going to ask Mr. Hill if the existing bungalow, the garage there, what height it was, and did it have any effect on the light of number 5? But I think he's more or less dealt with that to my satisfaction. I do agree with Councillor Jones that, you know, looking at the map, there is a tendency for them to look very close together, but the gap between, you know, the existing bungalow for planning and number 5 is supposedly, I assume, is 12 foot, and the others, looking at the map, must be considerably more than that. The only thing that I do know this area very, very well. It hasn't been mentioned, but the traffic is supposedly low, but it's increasing, constantly, because this is the road that leads up to the barn where all the filming is done, where you overlook the River Cuckmere, the Seven Sisters, etc., which is on television on a regular basis. And the road at times has coaches going down there, plus numerous cars, and it is a dangerous road. So I'm glad Mr. Hill has gone into great detail about the traffic issues. I feel that's important. I do think it's a cramped layout. It is an established character. It is one of the finest roads in Seaford. And in some ways, I'm very sorry that it is, that these two houses were cramped together. But I can't really see any reason why this possibly won't go through, I'm afraid. So I'm going to leave leave it at that and listen to other people.
Thank you, Councillor Amy. Over to Councillor Jim Lord, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Hill, the access onto the roundabout, you've actually got the wrong photograph. You've had the photograph looking down Chinkton Way. The next property when you back out of the proposed development is probably Newhaven. The roundabout where it is, when you back out onto the roundabout, the road continues, and then the road continues all the way down. There's no obstructions there. So I think if you put that one, it would have made it a lot more simpler for the members to look at the fact that the backing onto the roundabout is very, very simplistic, and there's very, very little chance of any hazard with regards to risk of an accident. The second thing is, it's really petty, but it's just with regards to where it says 2 new families moving into the area. Well, I thought one of the conditions of the people who have submitted the application was the fact they are going to be one of the families. So in actual fact, there's only 1 family moving to the area, not 2. And the last thing, I agree with Mr. Hill that the bungalow in question, it is in a condition built in the 1950s. I don't think it's had a penny spent on it since it was actually built. And I can see us surely being in a position whereby we're going to have to be doing something with regards to the fact that the property needs a lot of money spending on it to bring up to a condition which is in with the area. And finally, with regards to fencing, the bungalow in question has not got a fence around it. It's elevated from the footpath. It is in a nice condition. Sorry, it is a nice location, but it is very, very open. You can probably see it from Newhaven when you walk down the road. So it is an old property. It needs some money spending on it. The people who had it were going to refurbish it, and it's a tricky one because people in that particular part of Seaford don't fancy any change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lord. I think Councillor Jones, is your hand still up or?
No, I wish to put a proposal forward that we accept the officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Do I see a seconder, please? I don't have a seconder for this proposal to go with the officer's recommendations. I do see a seconder. It is Councillor Sylvia Lord. Councillor Lord, can you confirm if you're seconding, please?
Yes, I am seconding Councillor Jones's proposal.
Thank you. I'd just like to run through with Mr. Hill the previous comments as far as conditions. I have here timing. I have here bat survey. We've been through the garage spec. We have discussed as far as fencing or hedging. And I think that's what I have here. Perhaps Mr. Hill could just run through those, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got those 3. I've got restriction on the hours of work, and we said that Saturday morning was reasonable time. Survey for that to be carried out before any work takes place. Condition on no fencing or walling in the front garden, keep that open. Councillor Saunders did mention PVs, and looking through the list, If members don't propose it, I would propose an additional condition along the normal lines that the developers required to show us how they will meet the requirements of policy CP14.
I think that covers all of the committee's suggestions and comments. Yes, it does. Thank you very much. So we have Mrs. Stone.
So can you just confirm with the proposer and the seconder that they're happy with those additional 4 conditions that Mr. Hill just referred to? Just for...
Yeah, hold on. Sorry, Chair. Yes, in fact, that last one on CP14, it is actually covered, condition 3.
I didn't quite catch what you said. Say it again, please.
Yeah, condition 3 does cover CP14 and solar and renewable, so that's all covered. So it would be the 3 issues, which would be condition on the hours of work,
yes.
A condition on ecological survey for bats in the
yes.
premises,
yes.
and a condition on no fencing or walling in the front garden.
Thank you. Councillor Jones and Councillor Sylvia Lord, are you content with those conditions?
Yes.
Quite content, Chair.
Thank you. So that is confirmed. So we have on the table a proposal to go with the officer's recommendation, which is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions and the new conditions. We're going to go through the roll call in alphabetical order. I will call each councillor in turn to vote. Councillor Graham Amy, are you for, against, abstain, please?
Councillor Graham Amy, abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Doohig, please. For, against, abstain.
Councillor Doohig, for, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tom Jones, for, against, abstain, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Jim Lord, please. For, against, abstain. Councillor Jim Lord, for.
Sorry, Chair, I thought I'd said it. It's for, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sylvia Lord, for, against, abstain, please.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Millie Manley, for, against, abstain, please.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Sean MacLeod, for, against, abstain, please.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Imogen Makepeace, for, against, abstain, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor O'Connor, for, against, abstain, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Saunders, for, against, abstain, please.
Against, Chair.
Thank you. Can I turn to Mrs. Stone to read the results, please, for us of the vote? Thank you, Mrs. Stone.
Thank you, Kerry. Chair, so that vote is carried. 6 votes to 2 with 1 abstention.
2 abstentions.
I had 2 abstentions.
2 abstentions.
Oh, forgive me. 1, 2. Yes, you're absolutely correct, Councillor Amy. Yes, sorry, it's 6 for, 2 against, and 2 abstentions. I missed yours, Councillor Amy, at the very top. So yes, that vote is still carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And also that is to include the additional conditions. So that is application number LW/20/0565, location 3 Chennington Way, Seaford, BN25 4JA. Proposal, demolition of existing property and erection of 2 4-bedroom detached houses. Applicant Mr. C. Bryans, Ward, Seaford East, and planning permission has been granted subject to the conditions and the added conditions. Thank you. We now turn to agenda item 10, which is on page 45. Application number LW/20/0895, location 37 Capel Avenue, Peacehaven, East Sussex, BN10 8HB. Proposal, demolition of existing bungalow, erection of 2 number 3 bedroom semi-detached houses. Ward, Peacehaven East. Applicant PL Projects Limited. Recommendation approved subject to conditions. Mr. Hill, please.
Thank you. This is the site of the application number 37, Capel Avenue, at the southern end of the road and located on the eastern side. It's a bungalow plot, and as you can see from the site plan, they're all fairly regular plot sizes. Proposal is to demolish the existing building and to erect a pair of semi-detached dwellings with 2 car parking spaces to the front for each property, refuse and recycling store located near to the boundaries, secure cycle store for two bikes in the rear gardens. The rear gardens are about 9.5 to 10 metres in length. The building itself, as you can see, it has a multi-pitched roof with dormer windows to the front and to the rear elevation. In terms of layout, this is the ground floor of the northernmost property, and again, just showing the windows, the fenestration to the flank elevation. All the flank elevation windows would be obscure glazed. The upper floor with the 3 bedrooms, and study. Again, the front elevation of that is set back slightly from the front elevation of the main building. So you can see that from the elevation plan and when I show you the front elevation in a moment. The front elevation, so main access just behind the car parking spaces. You have a pitched roof pitching back from that front elevation and then rising up with these eaves dormers, 2 pairs of eaves dormers, both to the front and the rear elevation. One of the windows on the rear elevation with a Juliet balcony with full-length windows. Windows on the side, we haven't got a side elevation, I'm afraid, but those windows are all conditioned to be obscure glazed and fixed shut below 1.7 metres finished floor level. And the reason for that is because of the proximity to properties on either side. We've got some photographs of those, which I can show you in a minute. But very traditional design in terms of UPVC windows, brick facades, tile hanging, and tile roof. In terms of the street scene, looking towards the site from Capel Avenue, the outline here is the outline of the existing bungalow. So you can see there's about a 1.2 metre high raising of the roof. But again, I think the important thing to remember here is that the roof pitches back from the front elevation and in from the side elevations, so almost pyramidal in terms of its form. The building is not located any closer on the northern boundary. The bungalow here does have 2 windows in its flank elevation, which I'll show you on some photographs in a minute. That's the nearest property that would be affected. There may be an issue in terms of some overshadowing by this property, but I think a factor to bear in mind is that the bungalow itself could easily accommodate a hip to gable extension at the side here without requiring planning permission. And that would have a very similar impact to the scheme to the proposal that you have here. On the other side, again, you have garages which serve the larger building over here. Again, that will be evident from some photographs in a moment. But there is a bungalow on the southern side, but again, that's sited some considerable distance away from this property, and therefore there will be no direct impact on the amenity of that garden area. Taking through some photographs, this is the application property, and there's a number of things to note here. These are the garages, as I mentioned, which serve the property on the other side of this bungalow. This is the rear garden, so by developing that plot, it won't have any overshadowing or any overlooking issues because we, as I said, we've conditioned that the windows in both the flanks, north and south flank elevations, are to be obscure glazed. So the new dwelling would sit on the same footprint as this building, albeit slightly further forward and extending further to the southern boundary. The other thing to note from some of these photos is the bungalows to the rear. and the separation distance back to back from the back of the proposed dwelling to the back elevation of the bungalows is approximately 18.5, 19 metres, which residential to residential is an acceptable back-to-back distance, bearing in mind that they're bedroom windows that would be at the first floor level. The other factor is there's a wide diversity of roof shapes and forms along the street, including dormer windows. This property, which has clearly been extended and has had the slope reduced. And again, there's no uniformity in the properties themselves. And looking on the other side of the street again, dormer windows, some gable end on, some are fully hipped. So there is no set building style, and indeed some of the properties have had their roofs converted to provide rooms in the roof space. Looking head on, again, this bungalow is the one set on the other side of the access road to the garages, and again the separation distance is satisfactory in terms of issues of overlooking or overshadowing. There are two rooms on to the north and on the southern elevation of the adjacent occupier, which I believe this is a secondary window to the front room. This, I believe, is a dining room window, and this window would be impacted on by the development itself in some degree, but it is a south-facing window. And just taking you back to the site plan, the window in question is located approximately here, level with the apex of the roof, and it's extending back. So at this point here is where the window, that second window, is located. And the development itself will have some impact. This is the outline of the existing bungalow. And you can see that the new proposal extends that further back to the east. But I think the redeeming factor really is that there is still a just over 5 metre separation distance between the new proposed dwelling and the flank wall. Also, that the roof itself, as you can see from the plans, is both hip to the front and the rear. So light will, at certain times of the year, get round the building to the rear and the front, and there is quite a significant hip on this elevation facing onto that property. So we're not pretending there won't be some impact. What we are saying, though, is that having assessed the proposed scheme, that impact would not be so great to that room to justify the recommendation of refusal. I think I've covered most of the things that are set out in the report. So if members have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer those, but nothing further to add at this stage, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. We're over to Mr. Palmer and Mrs. Norman as far as speeches.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Jennifer Norman in Democratic Services, and thank you to Mr. Hill for his presentation. We have received 3 written representation in respect of planning application LW/20/0895, 1 from the Town Council, 1 in objection to the application, and 1 in support of the application. So I will begin by reading the representation received by the Town Council and then hand it over to Mr. Palmer for the objectors. And this is a statement received from Councillor Isabel Sharkey, who is chair of the Peace Haven Town Council Planning Committee. And she is speaking on behalf of Peace Haven Town Council in reference to planning application LW/20/0895. As chair of the Planning and Highways Committee at Peace Haven Town Council, I would like to submit the following summary of our objections. The proposed development is overbearing and out of keeping with street scene. These units are fundamentally different to the neighboring properties in terms of design, density, massing, and materials, and will have a detrimental effect on local character. The homes do not respond sympathetically to local surroundings. The proposed units are considered to be overdeveloped of the plot in terms of bulk, form, height, massing, and proportions. They are out of scale in keeping with the local context in terms of adjacent properties and the architectural rhythm of Capel Avenue. There will be loss of privacy and adverse impacts for immediate neighbors in respect of outlook and daylight. Proposals will result in unacceptable overlooking and are too close to neighboring boundaries. There will be loss of light resulting from the proposals being so close to neighboring properties, and proposals will result in having a detrimental effect on planning highway safety in the immediate vicinity of the site. Overall, the bungalows are in short supply, and we would advocate the retention of this type of property as they fulfill a valuable need for the elderly and disabled in accordance with the Equalities Act of 2010. The section of Capel Avenue is distinctive in that it's entirely bungalows, and the properties behind it in Keimer Avenue are also predominantly bungalows as well. The proposed dwellings will be out of keeping and would potentially start a precedent affecting the entire street scene. Capel Avenue is a no-through road. We are concerned in terms of construction vehicles. Should permission be granted, we would ask that consideration is given to construction management and highway safety in particular. And policy. We do not consider that the proposed development accords with the development plan policies, particularly CP2, housing type, mix, and density, CP11, built environment, and DM5, design. And that concludes the representation received from Peacehaven Town Council, and I will hand it over to Mr. Palmer to read the objection.
Thank you, Lee Palmer. I shall read out the letter in objection on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Fitzpatrick, immediate neighbour to the application LW 200H95. Mr. and Mrs. Fitzpatrick live at number 39 Capel Avenue. Dear Planning Applications Committee, we write in connection with the above planning application. I have examined the plans and I know the site well. I wish to object strongly to the development of these houses in this location for the following reasons. The new build will overshadow our property, causing loss of light to my dining room, living room and conservatory areas. The main issue with this being that our son is profoundly deaf and relies on British Sign Language and lip reading to communicate. To enable and support this, he requires natural light to see our lips. The new building will be overbearing and overshadowing to the south-facing side of our property, which is where our dining room sits within our property. This room being the main room where we sit, eat and communicate. 8.4.2 of the approval report states, the flank wall will project further to the front of the site as the frontage is currently recessed towards the north of the site and would also extend approximately 4.15 metres further to the rear than the main rear elevation of the existing dwelling. There are two side-facing windows on the neighbouring property that would face directly towards the northern elevation of the proposed building. The first of these is a window for a living room that is also served by a front-facing window, which would be unaffected by the proposed development. The second serves a dining room, which currently faces towards the side elevation and roof of the existing building and experiences a certain level of overshadowing, although this would increase to a degree due to the height and depth of the flank elevation wall being extended. Therefore, we do not believe that our son's human rights to access natural light to enable him to communicate has been taken into consideration. This is a breach of the Equalities Act due to his disability. If the new build is authorised, it will force us to use more lighting within our house to support our son, which will have a negative effect on climate change principles being adopted by the new build and across the country and cost us more money in energy costs. This will not promote a healthy and safe environment stroke community for our son, who also has other learning disabilities, and will have a negative impact on his mental health due to the impact this will have on his ability to communicate effectively with natural light. The new build will also give loss of privacy and direct sunlight from the southwest into our garden, and we believe it will give a significant adverse effect on our living conditions and that of other neighbours. We respectfully request you view our objections sympathetically towards our son's needs. And that concludes the representation in objection on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Fitzpatrick. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. So we're over to the committee for your comments, please. And I see Councillor Jones' hand first of all. It's Mrs. Norman. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Sorry, Chair. We do have one more written representation in respect of this application. So I will just proceed with the final one. And it is from Chris Baker, who is the agent for the application LW/20/0895. And this is a statement to be read on behalf of Mr. Baker of ECE Planning. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to address this committee. I am presenting our submissions as planning agent in support of the strong officer recommendation of approval of this scheme in Peacehaven. I have worked with the applicant for around 15 years, who has delivered in excess of 25 number 2 for 1 style developments in Peacehaven and the surrounding area. We have always produced high quality developments that respond fully to their individual settings with varying scales and forms of developments approved by officers and members. The scheme before you this evening responds entirely to its context in Capel Avenue, which is characterized by an eclectic mix of dwelling forms, heights, and styles as set out in the officer's report. As you will see from the plans presented at Capel Avenue, the scheme is very similar to many other examples permitted in close proximity to the site, located between a bungalow to the north and properties, including the 2-story properties to the south. The chalet roof of the proposal, with its hipped form, is considered therefore to represent an entirely appropriate transition in scale between these properties as shown below. The proposals therefore cannot be seen to be out of keeping, and it is clearly entirely appropriate for the setting, with large between the properties, ensuring that the amenity of neighbors is also fully preserved. Appropriate levels of off-street parking, 2 per house, are also provided to ensure that on-street parking is not compromised, and the addition of a single further dwelling on the plot is not considered to cause any harm to highway safety. We must all work positively to address the housing needs in this area, and our client has a proven track record of delivering high-quality homes to meet local needs. We trust, therefore, that you will agree with your officer's strong recommendation of approval and grant conditional consent for these 2 high-quality family homes as set out in the report before you. Thank you, Chair. And that concludes the final representation in respect of planning application LW/20/0895. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Norman. I did see Councillor Jones' hand, then I saw Councillor Saunders, please. Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I think until I heard the story about the sibling who's got a number of medical problems, I'm very sympathetic towards this, and it leads me to suggest that perhaps there is a need for a deferment so that we can allow the current occupants time to produce a medical report in support of their son's condition. At the moment, there seems to be scant regard being paid to that from the other people, no mention of it. So I would like to see us being a fair bit compassionate here and giving the people who are living there an opportunity to present in further detail their case with reports from medical specialists to say or suggest that no, this would not be acceptable for the benefit of this person with the medical conditions. So I'm not going to comment any further about the rest of the application, because I think it is important, so important, that we do pay careful regard to people who do have these issues attached to them. I also speak to, as a carer with people who have these conditions, a tad younger in age, but nonetheless, I'm heavily involved with it, and I know what the problems are. So I would go and say we consider, if possible, a deferment to allow these people who live there an opportunity to get the medical support written to the council so that we can have a much better idea of what it is we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Saunders, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just a little bit surprised with the situation that we're in here with this development in at the end of a cul-de-sac, that we've not, doesn't appear to be any conditions for requirements on a construction management plan for this development. So I would like to see that added with the restrictions as we would normally expect in this residential site of just Monday to Friday working, and I understand now Saturday mornings as well. And there's quite a lot of demolition that's going to be happening here. And not only is this a cul-de-sac, but also at the end I note when I look on Google that there's actually access to some garages for the properties which face onto the South Coast Road at this position. So there's access and egress issues for neighbouring properties, and of course the noise abatement issues which are going to be caused by demolition and then the subsequent construction on this site. So I'd like to see those added if possible, Chair. I do note that, as has been said by the supporter of the applicant's agent, I believe, in this application, that there are a number of developments of this type in Peacehaven. It's quite common. So from that respect, there is, as I say, almost a precedent set in Peacehaven for this type of development. So I support that. But I would just like to see that condition added if a proposal is to be made for going along with the officer's recommendations, which I would then be quite happy to propose. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Can we just, before I see your hand, Councillor O'Connor, Councillor Makepeace, but perhaps we can go back to Mr. Hill, because there has been a point raised as far as health of the neighbour. And I just wondered if Mr. Hill or Mrs. Stone could just run through the committee as far as material considerations for the neighbour's health, if you may, please. Thank you.
I think that the development itself, yes, if members have concerns that may have an impact, but it's also, I think, in terms of wider amenity, in terms of overshadowing to that room. But if you want to go for deferral for that, how long are you going to give? Because again, the developer has put the application in, it's a live application. How long is reasonable to ask someone to get that information back to the committee? But yes, I mean, we can certainly ask for that if the committee is so minded.
I think, Mr. Hill, my question was as far as material consideration. Is it a material consideration, please?
We have accepted that as a material consideration in the past, yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Stone?
Yes, Chair. I mean, very exceptionally, can the personal circumstances of an individual be taken into account in a planning decision? So it shouldn't be the major consideration. It's exceptionally something that if all other factors are clearly balanced, it might tip the balance one way or the other. But it's not something you would normally consider as a starting point when considering an application. I think first of all, you have to consider what your concerns are in relation to the light position and what effect that may have on the individual. And if you do have concerns, you know, it's information we don't know at this precise moment, how quickly medical evidence could be provided, and what that might say. But you know, it's not a foregone conclusion that it has a detrimental impact on an individual. I mean, I don't know if it's a child. I don't know if it's an adult person with a disability, but we have to take that into account. But it's very only exceptional if all other factors are balanced. If they think that, they may be able to defer for a short period to get that information, because we also have a duty to determine the application without delay.
I think another factor just to bear in mind is, as you've heard from the representations, you're only talking about one room, one window. There are 2 windows to the living room. You've got the conservatory out the back, and it is only the 1 window. So, you know, to justify a refusal based on the impact of that to 1 room of a dwelling, I think is going to be marginal. I think if it was the main living room and it was probably the only room with direct sunlight or whatever, then I think that would be a fair point. I think it would be very hard, even if you had medical information coming back at you, to say that it justifies a refusal based on the impact on 1 room, which is the dining room, when you still have a double aspect living room to the front, the conservatory to the rear, etc. So I think you need to bear that in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. That's very helpful. Over to Councillor O'Connor, please.
Thank you, Chair, for that. I was going to raise those 2 points, the management plan and the human rights aspect. The objector raised human rights. It sounds as though, from what Mrs. Stone was saying, that this could be considered a material factor, which is of note. My other point was I am concerned about the effect upon the area in respect of this building, this proposed building. The immediate area surrounding it, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hill, there are no houses as such. Although this is done as well as it can be, and the developers have clearly had success elsewhere and built appropriately elsewhere. I'm not saying this is inappropriate, but I am saying it is quite different, because Capel Avenue at this particular point is bungalows, and the adjoining street is bungalows, which has been accepted. So we are materially going to change the character of the area. Now, that may happen in time, but this is a factor when we're looking at how we want our towns to look. So is it overbearing? Well, I don't think it is overbearing, but I do think that it is changing the street scene quite considerably. And for that, I do have concerns. And so I would say that at this time, I'm not convinced this is a good proposal. But I wait to hear what colleagues say. But at the moment, I'm not in favour of this this particular proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Makepeace, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Councillor Jones for raising the giving us the opportunity to act with some compassion on what's very often dry considerations, and I think all we're asking for is deferment. Does it mean that we have to refuse the planning permission, or can we ask for simply a delay?
If the committee wish to go down that line, you can ask for a deferral. But as I said, I think you need to bear in mind that you're asking for that information because a case was made for 1 room in a dwelling, and there is more than one room in that dwelling. So it is only 1 room that's going to be affected. Also, how long are you willing to wait for that information? We have a duty you're asking the third party to get that information. They may well have to pay for that information as well, if they have to go to their GP. And what precise information are you after? And how long should we wait for that information before we bring the application back to the committee? I think these things you need to be mindful of, because we have a duty to determine applications as and when they arrive on our desks.
Thank you.
Councillor Makepeace, are you content?
Thank you. Yes, it's useful to hear those thoughts.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jones, is your hand still up, or?
No. I wish to sort of build upon what I've already said. In fact, I did ask for deferment because at least we're not saying no, it's out of the question. But I think we also have a responsibility to the welfare of all our residents. And quite often, it's quite a sort of very dry yes, no response to planning but there are other issues which we must take into consideration. Yes, it does allow us to defer. It does allow us to give these people time to provide the sort of information we're looking for. Is it essential for this? Must he have that? And then we can build upon coming up with a recommendation for planning which fits in with the occupants of the in fact it's next door. I said the actual planning application is the house next door, is it not? And I strongly feel that we would not be amiss in asking for a deferment. How long? 4 weeks, or until the next planning application, or in 2 planning application hearing time. I think what is important that we give these people the opportunity to go and get the medical support that I think they deserve.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Sean MacLeod, and there is another hand, but I can't see the face. Councillor MacLeod, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd second Councillor Jones's deferment idea if he wants to propose it quite happily. Their one room, they made it pretty clear that it's their main and the main room they occupy, and I do think we need to take that into account. And I think Councillor Jones's points are completely valid. And I kind of agree with him. It's about time we started listening to some people's concerns in this aspect also. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, MacLeod. There is another hand up. Mr. Palmer.
I think Councillor Duhigg has her hand up, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duhigg. Councillor Duhigg, thank you.
Yeah, my apologies. I'm having a bit of a router problem here. This is my first time hearing what Councillor Jones is proposing, and for medical reasons, maybe to be sought to have a deferment. So it's the first time I've heard of it. Legally, how much can a medical profession respond to such a request from a planning committee and a planning authority? Just give me a bit of guidance, first of all. So it's the first I've heard of it in even my previous 10 years as a planning committee member. Can I just have a guidance, please?
Yes, I think we're going to go back to Mrs. Stone.
Yeah, if the committee decides to defer for that reason, we will write to the adjacent occupier, being mindful of the representation they made, ask them to provide medical evidence to indicate the severity and the needs of that young person within the dwelling. And I think also, in view of what I've said in terms of that one room, and it is only the one room that is affected, how important is that room? Can they not utilise other rooms within the house as well? Because if it is only one room that is going to be affected, would the committee be in a position, notwithstanding the medical advice that comes back, be in a position to say, well, notwithstanding the fact you've got 2 other rooms, 3 other rooms that you can still utilise, which aren't affected by overshadowing, is this one room so detrimental to the future and communication needs of that young person? And I think that we would have to get that information from them.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Just to add that, yes, obviously I'm very aware of that area and the concerns of the neighbours at 39 Capel Avenue, and I agree with Mr. Hill. There are 3 other windows, but it could be, you know, a health and personal issue to that one particular person. Depends, I suppose, how colleagues are going to vote, but sentimentality sometimes takes over. The heart rules the head in some cases, and I'm not being harsh. I'm a very practical person. Well, when you look at these properties, then as there has been 25 of them so far and a 2-for-1 within the area, many of the 25s are in where bungalows are built. And we are not bungalow city anymore, Peacehaven. We are progressing. It's not a retirement town anymore. It's growing with families. It's coming vibrant. The bungalows are going and being replaced with 1 or 2. We've got to be practical here. We've got people moving in that have families to enjoy Peacehaven. The bungalows, some of them are over 100 years old, 50 to 100 years old. We've got to get real. And apart from the concerns at number 39, Capel Avenue, I am going to actually, I don't know, I'm on one side and then the other. If we are going to go for deferment, then fine. How does that relate to how long it's been on the table now, Mr. Hill, to delay 4 to 6 weeks? How does that affect it legally and the applicant?
The applicant can submit an appeal for non-determination should they so wish, if it's been over the 8-week period. But notwithstanding that, it is perfectly reasonable for the committee, in view of what I've heard, to ask for that information. The difficulty is you're asking a third party for that information. You're not asking for the developer, so that third party will have to, pay some money to the GP probably, and to provide that evidence and that information that the committee wants on time. And I think we still have, notwithstanding how long the case may have been in, we still have a duty to expedite matters and to determine the application that is before you. Some of the comments made by some of the councillors on the committee this evening have raised concerns of another sort of built form basis. Now the committee may consider that may be sufficient to for someone to put forward a recommendation for refusal on those grounds alone. Going back to what Councillor O'Connor said, yes, I mean, most of the properties in the area are 2-storey. There are some, though, that have had their roofs extended. So it isn't out of place having a 2-storey dwelling there. And the form that these 2-for-1s take generally are that sort of chalet bungalow image. Councillor Doohig said, it is changing, and there have been a lot of these 2-for-1s. I think but each case has to be treated on its merits. What is the impact of that on the immediate and surrounding area, both in terms of the street scene, the built form, the impact on amenities, and just the ability to develop that site with no detrimental impact on its surroundings. I mean, these are all factors that can be considered. So it is a difficult one, and Councillor Jones has made a valid point about getting that information. However, just a word of caution, we're asking a third party to provide something, not the applicant. It's always easy to go back to an applicant and say, can you provide us information on this? They're the ones who are developing the site. You're asking a third party to now come in with that information, and you're asking them to get it within a reasonable time so that we can progress the application, whether in favour or against.
Thank you. Mrs. Stone, are you coming in here?
I think Mr. Hill has summarised it well. It's within the gift of the committee, whether to go with a deferral or an alternative recommendation. It's in the gift of the committee. That there's no one way that's right or wrong, but I think it has to be borne in mind what I said earlier about the personal circumstances. only being a material consideration as an exception to the general rule. And that's really when all other matters are finely balanced. And that's the sort of the planning law on material considerations and personal circumstances.
Thank you, Mrs. Stone. I think Mrs. Stone encapsulated quite a lot of the thoughts as far as material considerations. My point is, as far as the 2-for-1s in Peacehaven, 16 years ago when I first joined this committee, I remember then it was very new, the 2-for-1s. One could say it's sad over the years that it's increased at an immeasurable pace. But I think we should all remember what Mrs. Stone has said, what Mr. Hill has said. Also, what Mr. Hill has brought to our attention is strict time limits as such. So Councillor O'Connor is going to come back with something new. Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I agree with Councillor Jones. I think he was proposing a deferment. I think somebody else seconded it, but I'm happy to second that. I would say that I still do have concerns about the actual development itself because of its nature at the end of the close there on the South Coast Road, and therefore it changes the character of the area, the appearance, and it is going to change it quite considerably. And yes, I accept what you're saying, Chair. These 2-for-1 developments in Peacehaven have been ongoing for many years, and of course they provide much needed homes for people to move out of Brighton into this area at a more reasonable price level. So it is a good thing, but you've got to think about the effect on the area, and you might want to protect some areas from this sort of development within Peacehaven. I know from working on the neighbourhood plan, that's part of the basis of the emerging neighbourhood plan, that some sort of degree of protection would be given to some of these plotland sites which have bungalows on them, so that we can retain that because they have some sort of historical merit to them. But I would say, yeah, if Councillor Jones was happy to propose it, I'd second it if somebody hasn't already done, to defer this and get information from the residents who live next door, who have raised a very, very valid point and an important point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I think I actually have a seconder already, Councillor O'Connor, from Councillor MacLeod, if that's all right with you. I think we'll go back to Mr. Hill as far as if the committee decided, and we do not know what the committee has decided yet, but should they decide to defer, Mr. Hill, I'm sure, will come in on quite a tight time of when it should come back to this committee. But let's not imagine what might happen. Let's go to the vote, please. We do have a proposal on the table from Councillor Jones, and that is to defer. May I have your reasons for deferring, Councillor Jones, please?
Yes, to enable the neighbours to be able to consult with their own medical practitioner, and also more than likely enlist the help of social services, because my experience in the past outside of planning has been social services quite often get involved with this as well and can provide the backup relatively cheaply, if not free of charge. I think this is more important than anything else on the agenda for this particular item. And as soon as we get that out of the way, then we can get on with the business of deciding what we want to do with the actual planning application.
Okay, Mr. Hill.
Yeah, just very briefly, just members to be mindful of the fact that we're deferring it to assess the potential impact on the needs of a young person in the adjacent property. If that result comes back and says there are needs, I would assume the committee would be approving, because if you find fault with the application per se, i.e. you don't like its height, its bulk, its impact on the street scene or its form, then the committee should be refusing that tonight. You shouldn't be getting the information back from the third party when the application comes back to you and then refusing it on something that you could have refused it on tonight.
you
You just need to be I think you just need to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
Fact. If you find it acceptable, fine, then go and find out if there is an impact on the neighbouring occupier. If they come back and say there is an impact, then you can refuse it, possibly on the impact that it's likely to have because of its bulk and form on the overshadowing. But if you find that unacceptable anyway, then what I'm saying is you should be refusing it tonight on those grounds and not deferring it for a reason that you don't like it anyway.
Okay, I think we're labouring here. I can see your hand, Councillor O'Connor, but if you could kindly be brief, I'd be grateful. Yes?
I think to expedite things, Chair, yes, I would propose to reject this, and then we see where that vote goes, and then if the rejection falls, it goes to a vote about deferment. Is that okay? No. So in other words, if the rejection that I'm proposing does as a way forward, so I would.
Chair, I think we're bringing the two close together, which they are not. They're two completely separate issues. One issue which is there already that we know about, and that is a young person who has a medical condition, which could have an effect on what's being proposed next door. We need to get that medical issue understood by us all and out of the way so that we can have a clear path up to deciding then whether we want to say yay or nay to that planning application. But before we get there, we have got to deal with the neighbours and take careful consideration of their needs and their problems. And this is a medical one. I think it's just too easy to say, look, let's refuse it. And if we don't refuse it and allow it to go ahead, where are we then? We've still got a problem with the people next door.
Councillor
If
James,
we will suddenly find that we are going to approve the application.
I think if we can kindly, I can see Mrs. Stone here trying to help us with this one. Mrs. Stone.
I think it's in the gift of the committee. They have heard the advice from Mr. Hill. I think we have a proposal on the table to defer, and that has been seconded. Now, members can take into account the advice they've had from Mr. Hill when they choose how to vote on that proposal. I think we should vote on Councillor Jones's proposal, which is on the table, being seconded and being debated, before we then move on. But obviously, Councillor should be mindful of the advice from Mr. Hill, that they may have an alternative proposal if this one fails.
Okay, Mrs. Stone. Before we go any further, there is someone who hasn't spoken, and I did see this vignette flash. Councillor Amy, did you wish to speak? You have not spoken, others have.
No, Chair. No. No.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, without more ado, let us now go to this proposal that we have on the table, which is proposed by Councillor Jones. It is seconded by Councillor MacLeod, and with the four reasons mentioned by Councillor Jones, he wished to defer. I'm going to ask the committee in alphabetical order whether... Yes, Mrs. Stone.
Just to be absolutely certain, the purpose of the deferral is to consider the potential impact on a young person in the adjacent property, and we want to make that clear before we go to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mrs. Stone has made that, I think, very clear for us.
Well, I'm the one who's proposed this, and quite honest, we need to say to the neighbours, you are required or requested to obtain medical support for your son or daughter's condition. If we don't tell them that's what we're expecting them to provide with us, they're just going to sit there probably and not do anything about it. And so we're going to find ourselves in the same situation when we do come back. So I think we do need to include that we expect them to provide some written proof from their own medical personnel, doctor, and enlisting the help and advice from social services at county.
Mr. Hill and Mrs. Stone, I'm quite confident that officers are going to make this very clear should the vote go to deferment. Would I be right, officers?
Yes, we will. If it goes for deferral, we will write to the neighbour asking them to provide medical evidence information that the development as proposed would have a detrimental impact on the well-being of that young person specifically in that room.
Yeah.
I think that's very clear to me.
Agreed.
Thank you for that. So what we have in front of us is a proposal, and that is to go against the recommendation of approving this application and to defer this for the reasons aforementioned. We are going to the vote, but I can see Councillor Duhigg. We are going to the vote now, Councillor Duhigg. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order. All those who support Councillor Jones's proposal, which is seconded by Councillor MacLeod, to defer this planning application. Councillor Graham Amy, are you for, against or abstaining this?
Councillor Graham Amy, I'm for the deferral.
For deferral. Yeah. Councillor Linda Duhigg, are you for, against or abstain for this deferral?
Abstain, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tom Jones, are you for, against or abstaining for a deferral? Obviously.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Jim Lord, are you for, against or abstaining for this deferral?
Abstain this time.
Thank you. Councillor Sylvia Lord, are you for, against, abstaining for deferral?
Abstaining.
Thank you. Councillor Imogen Makepeace, are you for, against or abstaining from this deferral?
I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Millie Manley, are you for, against or abstaining for a deferral?
I'm for, and while I have my microphone on, I'd just like to say I'll be leaving the meeting after this vote to save interrupting again after.
Thank you very much, Councillor Manley. Councillor O'Connor, are you for, against or abstaining for deferral, please?
Councillor O'Connor, for the deferral.
Thank you. Councillor Sean MacLeod, are you for, against or abstaining for deferral, please?
I'm for deferral, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Saunders, are you for, against or abstaining for this deferral?
I'm against, Chair.
Thank you. So this application, are we going back to Mrs. Stone actually for the vote, please, Mrs. Stone?
Yes, the vote to defer was carried with 6 votes for, 1 against and 3 abstentions.
Thank you. And I just want to make it completely clear that officers are going to include in this decision of the information that will be required, and officers are going to give a time limit. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just clarify with the committee, what time limit are we giving? So that
I would suggest we give a month.
4 weeks from the date the letter goes out.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So application number LW/20/0895, location 37 Capel Avenue, Peacehaven, East Sussex, BN10 8HB. Proposal: demolition of existing bungalow, erection of 2 number 3 bedroom semi-detached houses, ward Peacehaven East. Applicant PL Projects Limited. Recommendation was to approve, and the decision by the committee is to defer, and it will come back to this committee in 1 month. Thank you. We now turn to agenda item 11, application number LW/20/0770, location 2 Lucinda Way, Seaford, BN25 3JD. Proposal: loft conversion to include raising the ridge height, installation of 3 dormers in the west-facing elevation, 2 roof lights to the east-facing elevation, and a south-facing Juliet balcony. Applicant Mr. and Mrs. Haycox, Ward, Seaford North. Recommendation, approval of planning permission subject to planning conditions. Mr. Hill, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the property. It's a corner plot on the junction of Lucinda Way and the Ridings. It's a relatively straightforward one, but the Town Council, Seaford Town Council objected due to the significant increase in the ridge height, 2 neighbour objections and 1 neighbour in support. The proposal is a fairly standard bungalow, and you'll see from some photographs in a minute. The proposal is to increase the ridge by 1.2 metres. This is the outline gable end on of the existing ridge, and they're proposing to raise the ridge by 1.2 metres in order to accommodate floor space within the roof itself. And as a result of that, the elevation to Lucinda Way will be provided with 3 small triangular dormer windows and a Juliet balcony on the southern gable end. 2 roof lights facing the neighbours, but they're at a high level. There's no issues. The issue really is impact on the street scene in terms of raising that ridge by 1.2 metres and the dormers themselves. Is the application property sitting in here, and again gable end on, so the ridge would be raised 1.2 metres, dormers on this side, and a new window installed here with a Juliet balcony looking over the street. And just looking at the wider street scene, you know, it is very much a bungalow area. They're all very, very similar forms and all very much orientated in very similar ways. So it's really whether on this corner plot, raising that by 1.2 metres up to here and putting these relatively small dormers on this side would detrimentally impact on the character of the area and the wider street scene. There's certainly no issue in terms of privacy or amenity. It is purely down to that fact, and your officers considered that the change was actually so marginal, being on a corner plot, and the regularity of the area, which isn't a designated area and has no area of established character or other designation, that raising that on a corner plot wouldn't be out of place and would actually add a more of a focus as opposed to the fairly standard approach in terms of the ridge heights. But that's what's before you tonight. Your officers are recommending approval as per the report, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Palmer, Mrs. Norman.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm we have no written representations received in respect of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Norman. So it's straight over to the committee for your comments. Councillor Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask Mr. Hill a question? I understand that it was put forward, I think, from central government that we can encourage now the raising of roof levels to create a second floor. Now, I know that it was relating to maybe a block of flats or something like that, but can that same principle be attached to a bungalow wanting to, in actual fact, put space into the roof by creating exactly what this application is about?
No, this application requires planning permission in its own right.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, fine. I'm happy with this.
Content? Thank you. Is there anyone of the committee who wishes to speak, please? Councillor O'Connor, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's an interesting one, this, because this area is the built form. The bungalows in the area are all of a type, and I'm not sure any in the immediate area have similar sort of extensions. So it's changing the character to some extent of this area, which was rather like what we were talking about earlier in respect of Peacehaven 16 years ago, when the character began to change. So this is, these I'm not sure how old they are, but they're not that old, are they, these properties? But people are going to begin to come forward as their families expand, or people don't want to move out of the area, or whatever, and they will want to enlarge their properties. So from being relatively small bungalows to enlarging them by doing it in this way, it is going to happen more, is likely to happen in this area. So it's an interesting concept, but it's right on the corner here, so we could argue that it isn't creating a precedent. But I think I'd be interested to hear what other people say, but I just note that it does change the character of the area, and I probably vote in favour of it, but I'll have to see what others say, because it does create a precedent. But I'll listen to others with interest. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. I don't see any other member of the committee with their hand up, actually. So no one has put their hand up. So do I have any proposal on the table, please, from the committee?
Well, I think Councillor Jones is, and I'd second it, or Councillor Lord, I don't mind.
Yeah. I'm happy to propose it.
Okay. And Councillor O'Connor, might I think you would second?
Yes, I would.
Would that be all
yes,
right?
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I see no one else wishing to speak. So we have a proposal on the table, which is proposed by Councillor Jones, and that is seconded by Councillor O'Connor, and that is with the officer's recommendation of granting planning permission. So I'm going to go to each member of the committee in alphabetical order as usual. So, Councillor Amy. Sorry, we're going to the vote.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I was ahead of you. I was going to say Councillor Graham, Amy, 4. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. Councillor Duhigg, 4 against or abstain, please.
Councillor Duhigg, 4, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, 4 against.
Councillor Jones, 4.
Thank you. Excuse me. Councillor Jim Lord, 4 against, abstain, please.
4, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sylvia Lord, 4 against, abstain, please.
4, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Makepeace, 4 against, abstain, please.
4, thank you.
I believe that Councillor Manley has left now. So we'll go straight on to Councillor MacLeod, 4 against, abstain, please.
4, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor O'Connor, 4 against, abstain, please.
Councillor O'Connor, 4.
Thank you. And Councillor Saunders, 4 against, abstain, please.
4, Chair.
I think that's everyone covered. We'll go to Mrs. Stone for her to give us the vote, please.
Yeah, that's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stone. So that is approval of planning permission for LW/20/0770, location 2 Lucinda Way, Seaford, BN 25 3JD. Proposal: loft conversion to include raising the ridge height, installation of 3 dormers in the west facing elevation, 2 roof lights to the east facing elevation and a south facing Juliet balcony. Applicant Mr. and Mrs. Haycox Ward, Seaford North, and planning permission has been granted. And that committee has actually concluded the actual planning applications, but we are turning now to a non-planning related item of which I need to have your support, and it is this. It is exclusion of the public and press to consider under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, excluding the public and press from the meeting during the discussion of item 13 on this agenda, as there are likely to be disclosures of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1, 2, 3, 6A, 6B of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act. I will take it that it is agreed unless anyone speaks to dissent. I'm just giving the committee a minute to respond.
This is a new one on me.
It is in the agenda. It's under point 12 and point 13. I don't see any dissent. So I'm going to close this part of the meeting at 19:24, and we shall then be meeting. The next date is April 21st, 2021. So this part of the meeting has been concluded. If you would kindly like to stay exactly where you are, committee, and just give a few minutes for officers to come back to us.